Hi, everybody. Tonight we begin a slow descent into the ancient world, one bathed in golden light and whispered myths, a world shaped by gods and titans, heroes and monsters, all cradled by the lull of the Aegean Sea. This is the tale of the Greek gods, explained through soft-spoken stories that weave their way through history and imagination. Across 24 chapters, we will unravel the vast web of myths and divine entanglements, one gentle strand at a time. And as you settle in, tucked beneath a warm blanket or drifting slowly into twilight, I invite you to let each word fall like leaves from an olive tree, quiet, deliberate, and full of meaning. In this first part, we return to the beginning. Not the beginning of Greece or mankind, but of everything, of time, of space, and of the immortal beings who would one day rule Mount Olympus. Long, long ago, before the Olympians or even the Titans, there was nothing. No sky, no earth, no sea. Just a vast, immeasurable void. The ancient Greeks called this void chaos. But don't imagine it as noise or fury. Instead, think of it as the silence before a song begins, a deep breath before the first word is ever spoken. Chaos was not male or female. It was not evil or good. It simply was, an endless chasm of potential where all things waited to be born. And from this formless emptiness, the very first entities emerged, beings of great power, not quite gods, not quite elements, but something in between. First came Gaia, the earth, solid, fertile, nurturing. She stretched beneath the void, rich with promise. Then came Tartarus, the shadowy abyss beneath Gaia, deep and full of secrets. Not a hell, not yet, but a place of unspoken depth. Eros appeared next, not the playful Cupid we may think of today, but a primeval force of desire and attraction. The power that draws things together and brings life from lifelessness. Then emerged Erebus, the darkness of shadow, and Nyx, the night, deep, eternal, and enveloping. Together they birthed many other children. Hypnos, the god of sleep, Thanatos, the god of death, Moros, the spirit of doom. Gentle or grim, each new being carried the echo of night's stillness. Gaia, alone and without consort, gave birth to Uranus, the sky. He stretched above her, brilliant and star-studded, and fell deeply in love with her. Their union was not just emotional, it was physical, cosmic, and from it came the first of many divine lineages. From Gaia and Uranus came the Titans, 12 mighty beings, each reflecting a piece of the cosmos. There was Oceanus, who circled the earth with endless waters, Hyperion, the Titan of light, Theia, who would bear the sun and moon, Coeus, the embodiment of intellect in the celestial axis, and Cronus, the youngest, most cunning, and the one whose name you may already know. But not all their children were pleasing. Among them were the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants with thunderous voices, and the Hecatonchires, towering beings with 100 hands and 50 heads. Uranus recoiled in disgust at their forms, and fearing their power, cast them into the depths of Tartarus. This hurt Gaia deeply. She had birthed these children from her own body, and to see them imprisoned, exiled into the bowels of existence, filled her with a deep sorrow and a rising anger. That sorrow turned slowly into rage, and rage into resolve. She whispered to her Titan sons, asking who among them would dare defy Uranus, who would free the imprisoned children and bring justice to the sky. Only Cronus stepped forward. Armed with a sickle of flint forged from Gaia's own stone, he waited in ambush for his father. And when Uranus descended once more to embrace Gaia, Cronus struck. In a single fateful blow, he severed his father's rule and his power forever. From Uranus's blood spilled onto the earth, strange new life took root. The Erinyes, the Furies, haunting spirits of vengeance, the Gigantes, towering warriors, and from the sea foam stirred by his fallen body, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, would one day arise. With Uranus overthrown, Cronus took the throne. He became ruler of the cosmos, king of the Titans. He took his sister Rhea as his queen, and together they ruled during what was later called the Golden Age, a time of peace, abundance, and no need for laws or punishments. Mortals lived freely, close to the gods, untouched by sorrow. But peace is often a delicate mask. Uranus, even in exile, had whispered a curse, that Cronus would one day be overthrown by his own child, just as he had overthrown his father. Fearful and suspicious, Cronus resolved that none of his children would live to challenge him. So, one by one, as Rhea bore him a child, he swallowed them whole, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, each sealed in the dark cavern of his belly. Imagine that for a moment, a mother cradling a newborn, only to see it vanish behind her husband's lips, her cries falling into silence, her grief unspoken. But when she became pregnant once more, Rhea could bear it no longer. This child, her sixth, would be spared, and so she turned to Godmother, her anchor. Together they devised a plan. When the time came to give birth, Rhea traveled in secret to the island of Crete. In a hidden cave among soft moss and whispering streams, she delivered a baby boy, her youngest son, the one who would carry the weight of prophecy. She named him Zeus. To Cronus, she returned with a stone wrapped in swaddling cloth, and he, none the wiser, swallowed it as he had done the others. Meanwhile, little Zeus grew in secret. He was nursed by a divine goat named Amalthea, and his cries were drowned out by a band of warrior dancers, the Coretis, who clashed their shields and spears whenever he wept. The future king of gods was hidden among murmuring trees and golden light, while the world outside lay quietly in the grasp of Cronus, a ruler unaware that fate had already begun to stir. And so ends the first part of our tale, where darkness and silence birthed a chorus of stars and myths. In the next chapter, we will journey with young Zeus as he comes of age, gathers allies, and begins to challenge the dominion of the Titans. But for now, close your eyes and imagine that hidden cave, the lullaby of goats' bells, and the soft hush of wind through ancient olive groves. The gods are watching, and they are only just awakening. The cave on Mount Ida remains still, save for the quiet breath of the infant god, swaddled in thick wool and nestled against the warm flank of Amalthea, the divine goat. Her milk was sweet and rich, and it filled the young Zeus with strength. Outside, the Coretis danced their chaotic rhythm, crashing bronze against bronze to mask his newborn cries, their feet stomping with such fervor that the mountain itself seemed to thrum beneath them. This symphony of protection continued for years, until Zeus grew tall, curious, and full of a quiet, simmering determination. Though his early life was hidden from his father's sight, Zeus was not raised in ignorance. The nymphs and woodland spirits whispered to him of Cronus, of the swallowed siblings he had never met, and of the prophecy that weighed heavily upon his birth. These weren't tales meant to frighten him. Rather, they wrapped around him like a thread, sewing a destiny he could not ignore. Zeus would listen to these stories with wide eyes and a stillness far beyond his years, storing each word as if it were an ember, saving it for the fire he would one day build. Gaia, ancient and enduring, watched the boy grow. Her presence was never loud, never demanding. She was in the moss beneath his bare feet, in the rustle of laurel leaves, in the deep vibrating hum of the earth itself. When Zeus turned from child to youth, when his voice deepened and his eyes burned not with anger but with resolve, she came to him in a dream, a simple dream, but one etched in starlight. He stood before Cronus, and his hand did not tremble. Zeus awoke knowing it was time. But one does not challenge a king, especially not a Titan, without allies. So, guided by both Gaia's wisdom and his own instinct, Zeus left the safety of the cave and descended into the broader world. He crossed rivers that remembered the steps of heroes not yet born, and walked beneath skies that had seen both silence and war. He was no longer a secret. Each step announced his return. The first to join him was Metis, a titaness of wisdom and deep counsel. She had once walked among the Titans, but her heart beat differently. She saw in Zeus a flame that could reshape the cosmos, not just a warrior, but a balance. She taught him the old ways, the hidden powers of root and word, and she gave him the knowledge of a potion, a special blend crafted from rare herbs that, if given to Cronus, would make the Titan disgorge what he had swallowed long ago. Armed with her gift and a growing fire in his chest, Zeus approached Mount Othrys, where Cronus held court among the remaining Titans. Disguised as a humble cupbearer, he entered the great hall, offering wine and flattery, eyes lowered in respect. Cronus, secure in his power and proud of the peace he had enforced through fear, accepted the drink without suspicion. The potion worked quickly. A great heave overtook the Titan king, and with each retch, a child was returned. First Hestia, then Demeter, followed by Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Each sibling emerged unharmed, ageless within their prison, and their eyes burned with the same light Zeus carried. For a moment, the world held its breath. Cronus, weakened and humiliated, stood before the children he had tried to erase. But Zeus did not strike, not yet. He turned to his newly freed siblings, each of them dazed but awakening to the weight of what had been stolen. Together, they fled. The storm had not yet begun, but the sky darkened with promise. Retreating to Mount Olympus, a mountain untouched by Titan hands, Zeus began to prepare for war. The other Olympians rallied, each discovering their own domain and purpose. Poseidon, drawn to the crashing of waves, began to shape storms and tides with a flick of his fingers. Hades listened to the silence beneath the earth and found power in the realm of the dead. Hera, proud and calculating, mastered diplomacy and order. Demeter whispered to the seeds of grain, and the earth blossomed in response. Hestia, ever gentle, became the fire that warmed hearth and home. But the Titans would not yield. Cronus, though wounded, was not broken. He summoned his brothers and sisters, and the war that followed, known as the Titanomachy, would shake the very bones of the earth. The battle did not begin with screams or swords, but with the stillness before a storm. The kind of stillness where birds go quiet, and even the wind seems to listen. The Olympians, young and daring, faced off against the Titans, who wielded experience and ancient power. The clash was not just of strength, but of age, of worlds. The old resisting the new. The war dragged for 10 long years. The sun rose over battlefields scarred by divine fury, and the night fell over broken mountains and cracked skies. Rivers ran backward, trees burned with blue fire. Mortals, still primitive, still unsure, whispered of thunder that wasn't natural, of stars that fell like stones, and yet neither side could find victory. Zeus, in his wisdom, realized that something was missing, a deeper power, a hidden strength. And then he remembered Gaia's whispered sorrow, long ago, the memory of the children locked in Tartarus, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, beings wrongfully punished, beings with reason to hate Cronus more than even he did. He descended alone into the pit of Tartarus. The air grew thick and still, the walls pulsed like veins, but Zeus did not falter. He released the Cyclopes, who thanked him with a gift, thunder and lightning, bound into his hands. And he freed the Hecatoncheires, towering giants with eyes like stars, who pledged their loyalty in a language older than speech. With their help, the tide turned. The Cyclopes forged weapons for each of the Olympians, Poseidon's trident, Hades' helm of invisibility, and Zeus's own master bolt. The Hecatoncheires, wielding boulders and wind, shattered Titan fortresses. Cronus was struck down at last, not with cruelty, but with finality. Zeus did not kill him. Instead, the Titans were cast into Tartarus, deep and sealed behind adamantine gates, and the Hecatoncheires, once prisoners, became their wardens. As the dust settled and the skies cleared, Zeus stood atop Olympus, no longer a hidden boy or a rebel son. He had become a king. But rule is not the end of a journey. It is the beginning of countless others. For though the Titans had been defeated, the world itself had only just begun to stir. Creatures roamed, lands stretched unclaimed, fates turned their wheels. And Zeus, despite his victory, would find that the crown he had won came not with peace, but with responsibility. Let your breath grow soft now. Let the quiet come back in. For in the next part, we will walk beside the new gods as they divide the world, claim their realms, and shape a pantheon that would echo through every story ever told. When the last stone fell silent and the Titans were chained in the deepest shadows of Tartarus, the world itself seemed to exhale. The air, once crackling with divine tension, softened. The skies cleared and the seas no longer boiled. The earth, bruised and battered, began to settle. Zeus, now king of the gods, stood with his siblings atop the mist-wreathed summit of Mount Olympus. Around them, the air was thinner, quieter, more ancient than any song. Clouds curled lazily beneath their feet, and for the first time, they looked not as exiles or warriors, but as rulers. And yet, victory brought its own questions. Who would rule what? Who would carry which burdens? Who would hold the skies, the seas, the dead? It was decided that the universe, vast and newly calm, would be divided by lot, not through argument or force, but by the silent wisdom of chance. A brass urn was brought forth, etched with old Titan runes, and into it went 3 stones. Zeus reached in first and drew the sky. It was fitting. He who commanded the storm and spoke in thunder would hold dominion over the heavens, the clouds, the stars, and all that soared above. He would watch the world from above, striking with lightning when justice called for it, or mercy demanded restraint. Poseidon reached next and drew the sea, deep, boundless, unknowable. His heart stirred at the sound of crashing waves and the call of ocean creatures that sang in forgotten tongues. He would shape the tides, command the storms at sea, and build a palace of coral and salt at the bottom of the world. Then came Hades. He drew the last stone, the one none desired, the realm of the dead, silent, cold, final. But Hades did not weep or rage. His face, always solemn, accepted the burden. He understood that every story ends, and that endings too must be cared for. He descended into the underworld, not with chains or gloom, but with quiet dignity, building a kingdom beneath the earth where the dead could find place, memory, and meaning. Earth, Gaia, was left unclaimed. She would remain neutral, sacred, touched by all but owned by none. A place where mortals would rise, where gods would walk in disguise, and where fate would weave its invisible threads. With their realms decided, the gods began to shape the world anew. Zeus adorned the skies with thunderclouds and summoned eagle winds to ride across the blue. He struck mountains with bolts to forge rivers, and his laughter echoed like summer storms. Poseidon delved into the trenches of the ocean, carving canyons and shaping islands. He summoned hippocamps, seahorses with foaming manes, and crowned himself with coral. His trident stirred whirlpools, and his temper, once roused, could crack ships in half with a mere glance. Hades retreated to the depths. There he raised the walls of Erebus, laid the river Styx, and called upon the ferryman Charon, who would guide souls across its black waters. He built the great gates of his realm and appointed Cerberus, a hound with 3 snarling heads, to guard it. And from the murmur of the lost, he crafted a quiet, solemn order. But ruling was not only about lands and oceans. The world still needed a tapestry of forces: light and shadow, war and wisdom, love and vengeance. And so other gods began to rise. First among them was Hera, sister and soon queen to Zeus. Proud, fierce, and regal, she became the goddess of marriage and family. Yet her heart was not a soft one. She burned with jealousy, for she had watched Zeus's affections drift like clouds. Still, her presence brought order and expectation, a spine to Olympus's heart. Demeter, serene and earthbound, shaped the seasons. Where she walked, crops blossomed and olive groves unfurled. She taught mortals how to harvest wheat, how to plant in rhythm with the moon, and her laughter brought spring in its wake. Hestia, ever quiet, remained at the hearth. She did not crave power or domain, but her flame burned in every home, every temple, every moment of peace shared among kin, the smallest, the stillest, and perhaps the most essential. Other gods were born or awakened, some from the older generation, others new altogether. Athena, from the very skull of Zeus himself, would come later, as would Apollo and Artemis, children of Leto, bright as sun and silver as moonlight. But not all who watched were pleased. Far from Olympus, hidden deep within the folds of the earth and sea, the ancient forces stirred. Nyx, the night, watched from shadowed skies. Erebus, her mate, whispered of balance lost. The old powers, those born before time, felt the shifting tides and knew the world would not stay still. And from Gaia herself came a subtle unease. Though she had helped Zeus, and though Cronus had been cruel to her children, she began to feel the ache of betrayal. Titans, her sons and daughters, now rotted in Tartarus, and Zeus, her grandson, had become all too powerful. From this quiet resentment, new stories would soon bloom. But for now, Olympus shone. The palace of the gods, built from pure white marble and veined with gold, stretched toward the heavens. It was a place of feasts, of arguments, of whispered romance and thunderous declarations. Muses sang in the halls. Nectar flowed in crystal goblets. Ambrosia, sweet as spring wind, was shared beneath starry ceilings. Zeus sat upon his throne, eagle perched beside him, his hand always near the master bolt. Poseidon visited rarely, preferring the endless wildness of the sea. Hades almost never rose from the underworld, content in solitude and the silent company of souls. The golden age of the Olympians had begun, and far below humans, fragile, curious, flickering things began to open their eyes. They looked to the skies and wondered. They listened to thunder and feared. They watched the ocean's fury and prayed. And slowly they began to build altars, light fires, offer olives and honey, hoping that their voices might reach the ears of the unseen. The gods, immortal and vast, leaned in to listen. And thus began the long, intricate dance between mortals and gods, a dance of love, punishment, gifts, and grief. The world was awake now, and the story had only just begun. Below the golden halls of Olympus, where wind brushed against marble columns and the songs of the muses echoed like distant lullabies, the world of mortals unfolded in slow, uncertain steps. The earth was wide and wild. Mountains climbed into clouds, rivers sang through canyons, and forests whispered to themselves in a language only nymphs could understand. Animals roamed free, untamed, ancient, and sacred. The stars wheeled overhead, their patterns hinting at destinies not yet fulfilled. But there were no cities, no temples, no human voices. Not yet. Zeus, now secure upon his throne, turned his gaze downward and saw the world waiting. It was rich, fertile, ready to be shaped, but something was missing. Something that could worship, dream, suffer, and build stories worthy of song. Something flawed, fragile, and yet in that very frailty divine. And so he called upon the Titan, Prometheus. Prometheus was not like his kin. Though he was born of the old world, he bore none of the bitterness that plagued the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus. He had not joined Cronus in war. He had watched the rise of Olympus with calm eyes and a mind that never stopped moving. Where other immortals sought glory, he sought understanding. Zeus tasked him with creating the first mortals, a race of beings made not of thunder or flame, but of clay and breath. And so, beneath the shade of a lonely fig tree, Prometheus knelt beside the banks of a clear river. With his long fingers, he gathered soft earth and water and shaped it carefully, lovingly. Not with grandeur, but with humility. Eyes, a nose, fingers, feet. He pressed details into every curve, and when the figures were ready, he breathed life into them, calling on a spark older than even Zeus himself. Humans were born. They stood blinking under the sun, their skin warm from the clay, their hearts full of questions they could not yet ask. They were weak, yes, no wings, no fangs, no divine weaponry. But they had hands that could shape tools, eyes that could read stars, and minds that could dream. Prometheus watched them with quiet affection. But the gods, they were not all so tender. To Zeus, mankind was a curiosity, not yet sacred. He gave them no fire, no knowledge of writing or healing or song. They lived in darkness, gathering fruit and hiding from the wind. Cold, hungry, and afraid of the night. Prometheus could not bear it. Against Zeus's will, he climbed Mount Olympus under cover of starlight. He crept into the sacred halls and stole fire, the divine flame that danced in the hearths of the gods, that forged thunderbolts and lit the forges of Hephaestus. He hid it in a fennel stalk, thin and hollow, and carried it down the mountain like a thief holding the sun. He gave it to mankind, and with fire came warmth, light, protection from beasts, the crackling glow of community. Humans gathered around it, told stories, forged tools, and began their long journey through time. Zeus, upon learning of this theft, was filled with fury, not because fire had been given, but because authority had been challenged. A god, a titan no less, had disobeyed him, and Zeus, ever proud, could not let such defiance go unanswered. Prometheus was seized. He did not beg. He did not explain himself. He met Zeus's wrath with silence. The punishment was cruel. He was chained to a lonely crag on the peak of Mount Caucasus, where the wind never ceased its howling and snow fell even in summer. Each day, an eagle, sacred to Zeus, would descend and tear into Prometheus's flesh, devouring his liver, the seat of endurance and emotion. Each night, his body would heal. Immortal, he could not die. The torment would repeat forever. But Prometheus did not scream. He endured, because deep in his heart he knew something Zeus did not, that one day from the fragile bodies of mankind, greatness would rise. But Zeus was not finished. In his eyes, Prometheus had not acted alone. Mankind was complicit in this rebellion. They had accepted the gift. They had dared to use it. So Zeus devised a second punishment, one not of violence, but of temptation. He summoned Hephaestus, the divine smith, and ordered him to mold a new being. This one would not be made of clay, but of ivory and gold. Her name was Pandora, which means all gifted, for each god contributed to her making. Aphrodite gave her beauty, Hermes gave her cunning, Apollo taught her music, Athena taught her to weave, but Hera gave her curiosity. When Pandora was complete, she was sent as a gift to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, a kind and foolish titan who welcomed her without suspicion. She arrived carrying a jar, sealed tight. Some say it was a gift, others a warning. Either way, she had been told not to open it. But curiosity is a powerful thing. One quiet afternoon, alone and uncertain, Pandora's fingers trembled around the lid. The seal cracked, a whisper, a hiss, then a storm. From the jar poured forth every sorrow the world would ever know. Sickness, war, grief, envy, old age, despair. The sky dimmed, the birds fell silent. Humans, once content with fire and song, now learned what it meant to suffer. Pandora, horrified, slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Only one thing remained inside, hope. And so the world changed again. Humans now bore the weight of mortality. They could bleed, they could cry, they could die, but they could also hope. It was not a cruel world, not entirely. It was complicated, layered, a place where both suffering and joy could walk hand in hand. Zeus returned to Olympus, his lesson delivered, but in the depths of his thoughts, a seed of unease remained. Prometheus, bound in agony, still defied him with silence. And humanity, though wounded, did not break. They lit fires, they sang songs, they told stories of gods, of thunder and fire, of pain and beauty. Stories whispered around flickering flames, reaching upward toward the sky, toward Olympus. And the gods listened, some with pride, some with envy. The world was no longer quiet, and something else, something new had begun to stir. The fires burned low across the valleys of early civilization, casting long shadows on cave walls and stone altars. Mortals now lived between wonder and sorrow, uncertain but ever-reaching. They tilled the soil with calloused hands, raised songs to distant stars, and carved prayers into bark and bone. They remembered the gods not as silent figures, but as powerful beings with moods, stories, and hungers of their own. Above, Mount Olympus shimmered under moonlight, its halls quieter now, but always watching. Zeus, seated upon his throne of cloud and polished ivory, watched the mortal world with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Prometheus's defiance still stung. Humanity's persistence in the face of divine judgment unsettled him. They were weaker than the gods, but in that weakness lay something stubborn, something unpredictable. To better observe the mortal world, Zeus began to walk among humans in disguise. Sometimes as an old man with kind eyes, other times as a noble traveler or an animal cloaked in majesty. He watched their festivals, their grief, their resilience, and occasionally he was drawn closer than he meant to be. Thus began one of the most infamous traits of the king of the gods, his many affairs. Zeus, though married to Hera, could not resist the pull of mortal beauty or the thrill of divine disguise. And from these unions, some tender, some tragic, heroes and demigods were born. But let us pause from his desires and instead turn toward Hera, queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage and women. She was regal, proud, and deeply wounded. Her love for Zeus had once been sincere, even fierce. She had married him after a long courtship, one where Zeus transformed himself into a wounded cuckoo to win her pity. She cradled the bird against her chest, and in that moment, the trap was sprung. Their union was sealed. But love did not protect her from betrayal. Over and over, Hera watched her husband wander. She saw him return with mortal children in his arms, gifted and bright, as if nothing had changed. And each time, a new flame of fury sparked in her heart. Hera's vengeance was not swift like lightning. It was patient, slow, and precise. She did not often punish Zeus. His strength and charm shielded him. But she turned her attention to those he loved, to the women and children left behind in his wake. There was Io, a priestess of Hera's own temple, seduced by Zeus and transformed into a white cow to hide her from the queen's wrath. But Hera knew. She claimed the cow and placed her under the watchful eye of Argus, the giant with 100 eyes. Zeus, to rescue Io, sent Hermes to lull Argus to sleep with stories and song, then slay him. Hera, grieving her guardian, plucked Argus's eyes and placed them upon the tail of her sacred peacock, a symbol that endures even now. Then came Semele, a mortal princess. She loved Zeus truly, and he visited her often, cloaked in mystery. But Hera, disguised as an old woman, whispered seeds of doubt into Semele's ear. "If he is truly a god," she said, "ask him to reveal himself in his full glory." Semele did, and Zeus, bound by an oath on the river Styx, granted her wish. No mortal could withstand the full blaze of his divine form. Semele was consumed in fire. But from the flames, Zeus rescued their unborn child, Dionysus, and stitched the infant into his own thigh until the boy was ready to be born. Dionysus would grow to become the god of wine, madness, and ecstasy, but his birth carried the weight of Hera's wrath. The stories continued. Leto, pursued across the earth by Hera, forbidden to give birth on any land that saw sunlight. At last, she found refuge on the floating island of Delos, where she birthed Apollo and Artemis. Even in exile, her children would rise to greatness, the god of music and the huntress of the moon. And yet, Hera was more than just vengeful. She was the protector of sacred vows, the guardian of women in childbirth, the queen who upheld order in a world fraying at its edges. She presided over weddings, watched over children, and offered strength to those scorned by fate. In her temples, women knelt not in fear, but in respect. They offered her lilies and pomegranates, symbols of both purity and power. Her statues towered over city gates, stern yet beautiful, reminding all who passed that love, once betrayed, could become a storm. Back on Olympus, the tensions between her and Zeus simmered like a pot left just below a boil. Theirs was not a marriage of peace, but of spectacle, stormy, eternal, and deeply interwoven. When they quarreled, the skies trembled. When they reconciled, the earth bloomed, and the other gods watched, some with amusement, others with dread. It was during this era of divine drama that another figure began to rise. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, born to Hera alone, either in defiance of Zeus or as a child of their stormy union, depending on the tale. He was not beautiful. In fact, he was born with a limp, and some say Hera cast him from Olympus in shame. He fell for 9 days and nights before landing in the sea, where he was raised by sea goddesses in secret. He learned the art of fire and metal, creating jewelry from pearls and armor that glowed like stars. When he returned to Olympus, it was not with vengeance, but with skill. Zeus, recognizing his value, offered him a seat among the gods, and in a strange twist, he offered Hephaestus the hand of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, a union of fire and desire. But Aphrodite's heart drifted, as beauty often does, and so new tales would soon unfold of passion, jealousy, and betrayal, not among mortals this time, but among the gods themselves. The Olympians were no longer distant and cold. They felt, they argued, they loved, they sinned. And mortals watching the skies began to see themselves in these stories, flawed, complicated, aching towards something greater. In the temples, prayers continued. In the fields, fires burned on stone altars. And in the deep quiet between dusk and dawn, the gods listened, their own hearts stirring with the weight of eternity. Far from the quarrels of Zeus and Hera, beneath the sky glazed with starlight and oceans that sang in slow tides, there rose a beauty so profound, so serene, that even the gods stilled when she passed. Her name was Aphrodite, and her birth, unlike any other, came not from a mother's womb but from the sea itself. When Cronus struck Uranus and the sky god's blood fell upon the sea, it stirred the waters into a white foam. From that foam, in a place where wave met light, Aphrodite emerged fully formed, a vision of allure and grace. She stepped onto the shore of Cyprus, her feet touching the sand like dew upon petals, and wherever she walked, flowers bloomed, doves circled above her, the wind sighed. She was beauty personified, but not merely beauty for admiration. She was the divine embodiment of desire, longing, and the pull between hearts, whether gentle or ruinous. The gods, upon first seeing her, were overwhelmed. Even Zeus, the father of thunder, felt a tremble in his chest. Poseidon's waves paused mid-crash. Apollo lowered his lyre. Ares forgot his sword. But Zeus, wary of discord, chose to marry Aphrodite to the one god he deemed least likely to ignite jealousy, Hephaestus, the smith, the god of fire and forge. It was a union of mind and craft, not of passion. Aphrodite, radiant and wild at heart, was drawn elsewhere. To Ares, god of war, proud, muscular, and brimming with bloodlust. Hephaestus, always watchful, knew of her glances, her soft steps into Ares' shadow. So he did what only a craftsman god could do. He built a trap, delicate and invisible, forged of golden threads finer than spider silk. One morning, while Aphrodite and Ares lay entangled in each other's arms, the trap sprang, a net of shimmering light encasing them both. Hephaestus summoned all of Olympus to witness their shame. The gods came, some laughing, others uncomfortable. Hermes nudged Apollo and whispered jest. Poseidon stood quietly, arms folded, but Zeus said nothing. It was not justice he sought, it was balance. Eventually, Hephaestus released them both. Aphrodite, humiliated but unrepentant, returned to her own realm, a place where love bloomed with every breeze and where longing never rested. Ares, unashamed, merely smirked and returned to his temple, bloodied sword in hand. From their union came Eros, the child of love and war, a winged youth with golden curls and a bow strung with mischief. Where his arrows struck, hearts ignited, some in tenderness, others in chaos. Aphrodite's role among mortals grew quickly. She was worshipped in quiet groves where roses climbed trellises, and in grand temples where incense drifted like dreams. Lovers carved her name into bark. Sailors prayed to her before setting out, hoping the goddess of beauty might still the sea with her smile. Yet beauty, even divine beauty, comes with its burdens. One day, a mortal woman named Psyche was born. Her beauty was so profound that people began to forget Aphrodite's altars. Statues of the goddess stood untouched, while songs praised Psyche's mortal form. Aphrodite, wounded and furious, sent her son Eros to punish the girl, to make her fall in love with something hideous, perhaps a beast or shadow. But fate, in its quiet humor, turned the arrow backward. Eros saw Psyche, and instead of harming her, he fell in love. He visited her in secret, cloaked in darkness, whispering promises only in the night. He made her vow never to look upon him. For a time, love blossomed, soft, trembling, uncertain, but curiosity crept into Psyche's heart. One night, she lit a lamp to see his face. The oil spilled. He awoke, and the bond was broken. Psyche wandered the earth in sorrow, seeking her lost love. Aphrodite, still vengeful, imposed impossible tasks upon her, separating grains from sand, fetching water from the river Styx, retrieving a box from the underworld. But Psyche endured, again and again, aided by creatures who whispered kindness, and by her own quiet strength, she completed every trial. Moved at last, even Aphrodite relented. Eros returned to her side, and Zeus himself blessed their union. Psyche was made immortal, and their love, born of secrecy, tested by trial, became eternal. Thus, Aphrodite learned that even the goddess of love could not always command its course. Love, once released into the world, became a wild thing, capable of beauty, yes, but also of pain. She accepted her place among gods and mortals alike, not as a gentle muse, but as a force to be reckoned with. From her touch came both unity and division. From her gaze, peace or war. She walked through hearts like fire through fields, and none who felt her presence ever remained unchanged. The mortals whispered her name in the dusk, in the hush between touch and kiss. And far above on Olympus, Aphrodite listened, not with mercy, not with malice, but with the still, endless patience of one who knows that no soul can escape the pull of desire forever. The world spun onward, and the gods watched as mortals continued to stumble toward one another, hopeful, trembling, and always just a heartbeat away from ruin or rapture. In the days when Aphrodite's name still lingered on mortal lips, another figure moved quietly through the golden corridors of Olympus. A god born not from desire or vengeance, but from something older, colder, and vastly more final. Hades, brother to Zeus and Poseidon, ruler of the underworld, kept to the shadows, not out of shame, but by choice. He did not hunger for praise nor parade among the temples of men. His domain lay beneath, beyond the touch of sun and starlight, where the roots of mountains tangled with lost souls in memory. Mortals feared him, of course. They spoke his name in hushed tones, as if saying it too loudly might summon death itself. They left offerings at the edges of forests or buried them near graves, coins for passage, honey for kindness, flowers for remembrance. But Hades was not cruel. He ruled with strictness, yes, and his justice was unbending, but he was not the bringer of death. That role belonged to Thanatos, the gentle god of passing. Hades simply received. He welcomed the dead, kept them from wandering, and held the balance between what was and what had been. His realm was vast and layered. At its borders flowed the river Styx, cold and black, where Charon, the ferryman, guided souls in silence. One coin for passage. If a soul had none, it wandered the shore, voiceless and forgotten. Beyond the river rose the gates of Erebus, guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound. Each head snarled at greed, regret, and falsehood. Only the dead could pass unharmed. The underworld itself was not just gloom and despair. It held asphodel fields, pale and quiet, where ordinary souls drifted like mist. There was Elysium, a land of golden light for heroes and the virtuous, a place where music never ended and the wind carried no sorrow. And then, deeper still, there was Tartarus, not merely a prison, but a chasm. There, the Titans groaned in endless chains. There, monsters lay in restless slumber. There, justice was as harsh as memory. Hades ruled it all with calm detachment. His voice echoed like distant stone. His eyes missed nothing, and yet he was alone. He had no queen. Unlike his brothers who moved through the world and took lovers freely, Hades remained bound to his throne, solemn and unyielding. But the heart, even one buried beneath centuries of silence, can stir. And so began the tale of Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and the bloom of spring itself. Where she walked, fields awoke, flowers followed her steps. She laughed with nymphs and plucked blossoms from meadows. Her hair held sunlight. Her voice was soft as rain on new leaves. Hades saw her once and only once, and in that moment his still heart moved. He did not speak of it to Zeus, not at first. He merely watched, from afar, from shadows, a love forming in silence. But desire, once sparked, is rarely patient. One morning, as Persephone gathered flowers near the edge of a field, the earth beneath her feet began to tremble. A fissure opened, wide and sudden, and from its depths rose Hades in a chariot of black horses. Before she could scream, he reached for her, not with violence, but with purpose. He took her hand, and down into the underworld they vanished. The field grew quiet. The petals she had dropped lay still, and the world above began to change. Demeter, upon discovering her daughter's absence, searched the earth in frantic sorrow. She questioned rivers, trees, winds. None dared lie. None had answers. She wandered across lands, her robes dragging across soil, her tears soaking into roots. Crops failed. Trees bore no fruit. Winter, the first winter, fell upon the world. Mortals, hungry and afraid, prayed for warmth. But Demeter could not hear them. She was a mother in mourning. At last, she reached Olympus and stood before Zeus. "Where is my daughter?" she asked. Zeus hesitated. He knew. He had given silent permission to Hades, trusting his brother's judgment. But he had not expected such sorrow, such silence from the earth. He sent Hermes to the underworld, swift-footed and silver-tongued, to negotiate Persephone's return. Hermes found her seated beside Hades, not weeping, not angry, but changed. She had tasted the fruit of the underworld, 6 seeds of a pomegranate, red and glistening. By the laws of the dead, to eat in the underworld was to remain. But Persephone did not resist the rule. She looked upon Hermes with calm eyes and said, "I am part of this place now." And so a compromise was born. Each year for 6 months, Persephone would rise and return to her mother. Spring would blossom again. Wheat would sway golden in the fields. The sun would stay a little longer in the sky. But for the other 6, she would descend to the underworld, not as prisoner, but as queen. Thus the seasons were born, not from science, not from distance, but from love, grief, and compromise. Demeter mourned when her daughter left, and winter followed. She rejoiced upon her return, and life bloomed anew. Hades, in his own way, loved Persephone, not with fireworks or songs, but with stillness, with trust, with shared silence beneath obsidian skies. And Persephone, she learned to hold both realms. She was no longer just the bloom of spring. She was also shadow and wisdom, a goddess who walked both sunlight and sorrow. Mortals lit torches for her. Farmers whispered her name during planting. The dying in their final breaths felt her presence, gentle, cool, inevitable. Thus, the tale of Hades and Persephone became more than myth. It became rhythm, the turning of leaves, the promise that loss was never final, that light could follow darkness, and that even in the deepest underworld, love could find root and bloom. Above the turning of seasons and the hush of mortal prayers, there came the rise of a god whose presence shimmered like sunlight on still water. A god whose every step was music, whose every glance held prophecy, whose every word tasted of both joy and truth. Apollo, son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, was born not into ease, but through hardship. Leto, heavy with twins, had wandered the world in search of refuge. Hera, wrathful and jealous, had forbidden any land that saw the light of day to offer her shelter. Mountains turned their peaks, islands closed their shores, rivers flowed backward rather than cradle her. But at last, Leto came upon Delos, a floating island, rootless and adrift in the Aegean Sea. It was not truly land, and so it defied Hera's curse. Delos welcomed her, and there, beneath swaying palms and guarded by gentle nymphs, Leto gave birth. First came Artemis, radiant and calm, born in a single breath beneath the silver of a rising moon. She did not cry, but opened her eyes with the wisdom of stars. She then turned to her mother and helped guide the birth of her brother, a god not of shadows, but of searing brilliance. Apollo arrived in golden light. As he touched the earth, swans circled overhead. Laurel trees shivered, though no wind passed. The island of Delos, once barren, bloomed with color and song. From that moment on, Apollo belonged to the sun, not just its warmth and light, but its constancy, its power to reveal, to heal, and to burn. He grew swiftly as gods do, his frame tall and elegant, his hands ever reaching for the lyre given to him by Hermes, a gift exchanged after mischief and forgiveness. With it, he composed melodies that calmed storms and stirred hearts. His voice was clear as crystal water, and when he sang, even stones remembered their beginnings. But Apollo was not just beauty and music. He was also a god of prophecy, of sacred knowledge. It was he who claimed the great oracle of Delphi, once guarded by a monstrous serpent called Python. When Apollo came to the site, the serpent challenged him, coiling around the stones, hissing with venom older than memory. But Apollo, without hesitation, drew his silver bow. He loosed arrow after arrow, each shining with divine light, until Python lay still, its coils unraveling into the soil. The earth, once cursed by the serpent's presence, became sacred once more. Delphi, nestled between cliffs and wrapped in mist, became the center of divine insight. There, Apollo's priestesses, the Pythia, would sit upon a tripod, inhale sacred vapors, and speak with tongues not entirely their own. Kings, warriors, and philosophers would journey from every corner of Greece to ask questions, and the answers they received were never simple, never direct, for prophecy is a mirror, not a map. Apollo loved order, harmony, and the brilliance of reason, but he was not immune to the chaos of feeling. There were many he loved, and not all tales ended in joy. There was Daphne, a nymph swift as the wind. Apollo pursued her, enchanted by her beauty and her defiance, but she wanted no god, no husband, no hand upon her shoulder. As Apollo drew close, arms outstretched, she called to her father, a river god, for rescue. He answered, her feet rooted, her arms turned to branches, her skin became bark. Leaves unfurled from her fingers, and in moments she was no longer a girl, she was the first laurel tree. Apollo fell to his knees, pressed his lips to her roughened skin, and wept. From that day on, the laurel became sacred to him, not as a prize, but as a memory, a symbol of love unfulfilled. Then came Hyacinthus, a youth of Sparta, radiant and strong. The two were inseparable, competing in games, laughing beneath olive trees, their bond blooming with tenderness. But one day, as they practiced with the discus, a jealous wind, or perhaps a darker force, twisted the path of Apollo's throw. The discus struck Hyacinthus in the head. He died in Apollo's arms, blood pooling into the earth. From that crimson soil, Apollo caused a flower to grow, the hyacinth, a bloom etched with the sound of mourning. Even the god of healing could not undo fate. Still, Apollo carried on. He became the patron of medicine, teaching mortals the ways of herbs and pulses, fevers and cures. His son Asclepius would one day wield such knowledge that he could raise the dead, a power that stirred Zeus's wrath and brought thunder crashing down. But Apollo remained undimmed. He walked among mortals, guiding artists, guiding rulers. He whispered truths into the dreams of poets and stood tall beside warriors who fought not for conquest, but for honor. His twin sister, Artemis, moved in contrast, a silver flame to his gold. Together they balanced light and night, music and silence, life and the hunt. Apollo's presence among the gods was like the sun itself, impossible to ignore, at times too bright to bear, but essential. He was the light that sought truth, the melody that lingered, the prophecy that both warned and promised. And mortals, ever caught between fear and fascination, built temples of gleaming white stone in his name. They carved his likeness into marble, always with calm eyes and lips just parted, as if about to speak, and perhaps he was. For the voice of Apollo was never still. It moved through forests, echoed in the strings of lyres, drifted from mountaintops. He did not demand worship, he inspired it. And as long as the sun rose each day, sure, golden and clear, the world would remember him. In the cool hush of twilight, when shadows stretched long across forest paths and the air smelled of pine and fresh earth, there walked a goddess who belonged to the wild, untouched, unchained, and fiercely her own. Artemis, twin sister of Apollo, was born beneath the swaying palms of Delos, moments before her brother, but with the gravity of one who seemed always older than time. Her eyes from the very first breath held the silver of moonlight. She needed no instruction. As soon as she stood, she strode forward, quiet, sure-footed, instinctive. While Apollo looked to the heavens and sought prophecy and praise, Artemis turned to the woods, the rivers, the hidden caves. She asked for no temples, though many would come. She carried no golden crown, though stars seemed to follow her. Instead, she asked her father Zeus for simple but unshakable gifts: eternal chastity, a bow and quiver like Apollo's, a retinue of nymphs pure and wild like herself, dominion over the wilderness and all its creatures, and the power to assist women in the moment of birth and pain. Zeus, amused and oddly moved, granted her all. And so Artemis became the goddess of the hunt, of the moon, of virginity and childbirth, of nature's raw and trembling balance. She belonged not to Olympus, but to the deep woods, the rustling leaves, the howl of wolves beneath the stars. She was not cruel, but she was not forgiving. The wild teaches discipline, not mercy. Mortals who stumbled into her groves without reverence found themselves lost, not in direction, but in spirit. Hunters who slew for sport rather than for need felt her arrows before they saw her shadow. She was a protector, but not a savior, a judge, not a comfort. One such tale was of Athena, a skilled hunter from Thebes. One quiet afternoon, while walking through the dense woods, Athena stumbled upon a secluded glade where Artemis bathed, surrounded by her nymphs. She stood waist-deep in spring water. Her bow leaned against a tree, her hair glistening like spun frost. Athena froze. Perhaps he meant no harm. Perhaps he could not look away. But Artemis saw him, and in her eyes there was no room for excuse. With a single gesture, she transformed him into a stag, tall and graceful, his human thoughts trapped behind the gaze of prey. Before he could flee, he heard the barking. His own hounds, loyal and relentless, caught his scent. They chased, they caught, and in a frenzied circle, they tore him apart. Not even in death did he return to himself. This was Artemis, pure but unyielding, beautiful but dangerous. Yet she was also the bringer of aid, especially to women. Midwives whispered her name during labor, invoking her strength in the moment when life and death hovered breath to breath. When a mother clutched her swollen belly beneath a waning moon, she prayed not to Hera, not to Demeter, but to Artemis, the one who had walked with pain, who had steadied her mother Leto during the most forbidden of births. Though Artemis vowed never to marry, many gods sought her affection. Orion, the great hunter, was one such figure. Bold and fearless, with steps that matched her own, they ran through forests side by side, raced through open plains, hunted beneath a silver sky. Some say she loved him. Others say she simply admired his strength, but their bond ended in tragedy. One version tells that Apollo, jealous of their closeness, tricked Artemis. He pointed to a speck far across the sea and dared her to hit it with her bow. Artemis, ever precise, let loose an arrow, only to discover afterward that she had killed Orion, who had been swimming. Grief overtook her. She placed his form among the stars where he remained still. The constellation Orion, his belt gleaming in the winter sky, forever running, forever out of reach. Another tale tells of the giant Otis and his brother Iphialtes, who tried to storm Olympus and capture Artemis for their own. Instead of fighting, she lured them into a trap, transforming into a deer and darting between them. In their haste, they each hurled a spear and killed one another. Artemis needed no armies, only silence, precision, the knowing of when to appear and when to vanish like fog at dawn. She was also guardian of animals, not just wolves and deer, but all creatures that lived without temples or towns. Bears curled beside her in winter, birds circled her above the canopy. She knew the language of wind in the leaves and could calm a raging beast with a glance. Her worship was unlike that of the other gods. Temples to Artemis were often deep in nature, stone circles, forest clearings, groves where moonlight slipped through ancient trees. Her festivals were marked not by wine or gold, but by foot races, hunting games, and songs sung beneath the stars. And yet, for all her aloofness, Artemis was deeply present to those who walked with reverence. A girl on the edge of womanhood, stepping into a forest for the first time with bow in hand, she felt Artemis. A mother clutching her newborn in the candlelight of a flickering heart, she felt Artemis. A solitary traveler beneath a quiet moon, with only the sound of crickets and the crunch of leaves. He felt Artemis. She did not speak often, but when she did, her voice was the rustle of branches, the whisper of an arrow through air, the hush of snow falling on pine needles. Among the Olympians, she remained apart, neither defiant nor submissive. She respected her brother, loved her mother, honored the balance of all things. But she answered to no one, not even Zeus. She was Artemis. And as long as forests breathed, as long as the moon rose, as long as there were those who walked the untamed paths, she would remain, watching, silent, eternal. While the world turned beneath the measured gaze of Artemis and the radiant music of Apollo echoed across mountaintops, there stirred in the undercurrents of Olympus a presence far swifter, far slipperier, and far more difficult to grasp, a god who danced between moments, words, and worlds. Hermes, son of Zeus and the mountain nymph Maia, was not born to rule, nor to conquer, nor to inspire awe like his half-siblings. His was a different light, clever, playful, agile. He was the wind between leaves, the pause between thoughts, the smile that follows mischief. From the moment of his birth, he was a whirlwind of motion. Before the sun had even finished rising on his first day of life, the infant Hermes had already left his cradle. While Maia still slept, he crept from their cave on Mount Selene and wandered into the world, tiny, barefoot, curious. It was on this very day that he committed his first act of divine mischief. He found a herd of sacred cattle belonging to his half-brother Apollo and decided to steal them. But Hermes, ever inventive, walked the cattle backward and wore woven sandals on his feet to disguise his trail. He led the beasts across meadows and into hiding, covering their tracks with care and precision. Then, returning to his cave, he crafted the world's first lyre using a tortoise shell, reeds, and gut strings. He plucked it once, and the sound it made shimmered like morning dew. When Apollo discovered the theft, he was furious, a storm in golden form. He descended upon Maia's cave and demanded justice, but Hermes, still swaddled in blankets, blinked innocently and claimed he had done nothing. Apollo, unconvinced, dragged him before Zeus, and Zeus laughed. He knew his son's nature. He saw in Hermes not rebellion, but ingenuity, the spark of invention. When Hermes presented Apollo with the lyre as a gift of reconciliation, Apollo's anger melted. The music was unlike anything he had ever heard. In return, he offered Hermes his staff, the caduceus, a symbol that would become one of peace, medicine, and commerce. Thus a bond was formed between the two brothers, and Hermes was welcomed into Olympus not as a thief, but as a messenger, a guide, a trickster, and something even more. He became the psychopomp, the conductor of souls. When mortals died, their spirits often lingered, confused and afraid. Hermes would find them. He would appear not with fearsome judgment, but with gentle clarity. He offered his hand, a hand that had stolen and gifted, lied and sung, and guided them to the underworld. He did not judge. He did not grieve. He simply led. But in life, Hermes thrived on movement. He was the god of travelers, of merchants, of liars and thieves, of poets and orators. He watched over crossroads and boundaries where choices were made and fates were nudged. He whispered ideas into the ears of inventors, bent the words of clever politicians, and turned the tides of markets with a glance. On his winged sandals, the talaria, he moved faster than thought, carrying messages from god to god, from Olympus to earth, from earth to shadow. But Hermes was not just speed. He was invention. He was improvisation. He was the moment a lie becomes truth because it is told well. He was the laughter after a mistake, the shrug in the face of danger, the coin that disappears behind the ear of a child. He fathered many children, some divine, some mortal, all touched by his unpredictability. One of the most curious was Hermaphroditus, born from his union with Aphrodite. As the child grew into a radiant youth, he traveled through the lands until he came upon a sacred spring where the nymph Salmacis lived. She fell in love with him at first sight. When he rejected her, she begged the gods to join them forever, and the gods, perhaps bemused, granted her wish. Their bodies merged, neither fully male nor female, but both, the first androgynous being, symbolizing unity, duality, and the mystery of transformation. Hermes was also credited with the invention of weights and measures, of dice and language, of astronomy and the alphabet. He was the god of thresholds, not just doorways, but emotional, intellectual, and spiritual transitions. He could speak to all creatures, gods, mortals, beasts. No other deity moved as easily between realms. He was present in myths of great drama and mythic scale, and in tales of simple humor and slyness. Once, when the gods were arguing about whether Prometheus should be forgiven, it was Hermes who delivered the final message, a mix of jest and warning. Another time, when Odysseus, weary and wandering, stood at the edge of Circe's island, unsure if he would be turned into a beast like his crew, Hermes appeared and offered him the magical Mali herb to protect him, saving the course of a great hero's journey. Hermes was the hinge upon which many stories turned. He did not sit on a throne. He did not raise temples of gold. But in every market stall, in every crossroad, in every tale where a clever twist turned fate, Hermes was present. Mortals carved Hermes, pillar-like statues with his head and a phallic symbol, and placed them at borders and paths. They believed his spirit would protect them, guide them, or at the very least challenge them to think one step ahead. For that was Hermes, the god who made the gods laugh, the god who stole only to give more than he took, the god who never stayed but was always near. He was the traveler beside the traveler, and when a soul wandered into the unknown, whether a distant land or the veil beyond death, it was Hermes who found them, smiled, and said, "Come, I'll take you the rest of the way." Far from the shifting laughter of Hermes and the delicate grace of Artemis, there rose a presence on Olympus that burned with raw, unrelenting force. A god who did not whisper or coax, but roared, fierce as wildfire, unyielding as iron. His was a language of clash and cry, of blood and breath. His name was Ares, and he was the god of war. Born of Zeus and Hera, Ares carried both their tempers in his veins. From his father, the thunderous will to conquer. From his mother, the pride that cut like polished steel. Yet for all his divine lineage, Ares was not loved. Not by gods, not by mortals. Even his own kin regarded him with unease, for he was not the noble strategist or the wise protector of cities. He was the chaos of battle, the cry of rage before the sword fell, the pulse that quickens when blood is spilled. He did not command war. He was war. Where Ares walked, armor clanged in anticipation. The ground seemed to hum, the air thickened. He needed no invitation. Conflict called to him like a lover, and he came willingly, arms outstretched, weapons gleaming. Yet unlike Athena, the other god of war, though hers was of strategy, justice, and precision, Ares cared little for reason. He did not measure before striking. His gifts were not clever plans or timely defenses, but brute force, raw instinct, and the thrill of close combat. His companions were as wild as he was. There was Deimos, the spirit of terror, and Phobos, the spirit of panic, his sons by Aphrodite, always riding beside him into the fray. There was Eris, the goddess of discord, who delighted in stirring rivalry and jealousy before battle had even begun. And yet, despite his power, Ares was often humiliated. In the tales told among mortals and whispered in the halls of Olympus, he was less a hero and more a symbol of recklessness, of destruction, of the cost of rage. One of the most remembered stories was not of his triumph, but of his capture. During the great war between the gods and giants, the Gigantomachy, two giants named Otis and Ephialtes managed to trap Ares in a bronze jar. For 13 months, the god of war was confined, silenced, forgotten. It was only through the intervention of Hermes that he was finally freed. Other tales poked at his pride more subtly. There was the affair with Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, wife of Hephaestus. Their secret meetings, stolen kisses, and tangled limbs were hidden from most, but not from her husband. Hephaestus, with quiet fury, forged a net of unbreakable chains so fine they were invisible. He cast it over their bed. When the lovers next met, they were caught, bound before they could part. Hephaestus summoned the other gods to witness the scene. Ares, the mighty warrior, and Aphrodite, queen of desire, writhing helpless in their shame. The gods laughed. Poseidon offered to pay the price of Ares' release, just to end the spectacle. And Ares, once freed, fled to Thrace, his favored land, where the winds howled and the warriors knew no peace. There, among spears and shields, he was still worshipped, not for love, but for need. Warriors cried his name before battle. Bloody generals offered him the spoils of victory. Statues of Ares were raised not in temples, but in barracks, where the clatter of training echoed against stone. Yet despite his roughness, Ares was not without complexity. In some rare tales, he was seen cradling Harmonia, his daughter with Aphrodite, the goddess of harmony, irony carved in flesh. Her birth reminded the world that even war could give rise to peace, that from the fire of conflict, something tender might still grow. And though the gods dismissed him, though Athena bested him in contests and Zeus scolded him for his recklessness, Ares endured. He did not care for judgment. He was not sculpted from reason. He was impulse, fury, movement. His strength was not in elegance, but in persistence. And mortals, in their own way, understood this. For they too were creatures of anger and fear, of sudden violence and bitter regret. They too bled, struck, cursed the sky. And in those moments, fists clenched, voices raised, hearts pounding, Ares was near, not in condemnation, not in comfort, but simply present. He stood beside the foot soldier in mud and blood. He rode beside the charioteer whose arms ached with tension. He whispered in the ears of kings who dreamed of conquest, and in the silent spaces where warriors counted their scars. To pray to Ares was not to ask for peace. It was to ask for strength, to endure the storm, to rise when struck, to feel fully the fire in the belly before the first blow is thrown. And in this, he was divine, not polished, not wise, but honest. The gods, for all their order and light, needed one among them who could rage. And mortals, ever torn between glory and ruin, would always understand him best. For every battlefield that stained the earth, Ares was remembered, not in song or statue, but in the heartbeat of the moment when everything might be lost. And still, you press forward. As the fires of battle cooled and the echoes of Ares' war cry faded into the background of Olympus, another figure rose to remind the world that not all strength is found in chaos or blood. That wisdom too holds power, not loud or sudden, but deep, deliberate, and enduring. Her name was Athena, born not in the usual way, but in one of the most curious and awe-filled births in all of myth. Athena came into the world from her father Zeus, fully grown, fully armored, and with a cry that rang across heaven and earth. The story begins with Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, the first wife of Zeus. When she became pregnant, a prophecy whispered that her child would surpass its father in power. Fearing what this might mean, the echoes of his own father's downfall still fresh, Zeus made a swift and fearsome decision. He swallowed Metis whole. But wisdom cannot be silenced so easily. Inside him, Metis continued to live, her thoughts sharp, her spirit unbroken. And from within Zeus, the child grew. One day, overcome by a thunderous pain in his head, Zeus called out in agony. The gods gathered, none could soothe him. At last, Hephaestus, with measured breath, lifted his hammer and split Zeus's skull with a single blow. From the rift leapt Athena. Clad in gleaming bronze, spear in hand, eyes blazing with clarity, she stood unshaken. Her armor shone like the morning sun. Her voice was composed, and in her presence, even the elder gods paused. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, strategy, craft, and just war. Unlike Ares, whose bloodlust clouded reason, Athena approached conflict as a chessboard, every move considered, every angle assessed. She did not charge, she calculated. And in that silence, in that control, lay her unmatched power. But she was not merely a warrior. She was the patroness of civilization, of law, of architecture and weaving, of philosophy and politics. Where chaos reigned, she brought order. Where confusion stirred, she brought clarity. Where brute strength failed, she offered intellect. Cities built in her honor flourished. Most famous among them was Athens, a city that bears her name not by inheritance, but by contest. Long ago, Poseidon and Athena both sought dominion over a new city-state. To determine who would rule it, they each offered a gift. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and from the earth burst a salt spring, wild, briny, powerful, and untamable. Athena, by contrast, planted the first olive tree, humble, green, and slow-growing, but rich in fruit, oil, and wood, a gift of peace, nourishment, and endurance. The people chose Athena, and Athens would rise to become a beacon of art, wisdom, and democracy, a city that prized knowledge as much as strength. Athena's wisdom was never passive. She did not dwell in scrolls alone. She guided heroes, forged weapons of great importance, and counseled in the most pivotal of mortal moments. To Perseus, she gave the polished shield that allowed him to slay Medusa, whose gaze turned men to stone. He used the reflection to strike without meeting her eyes, a victory of wit over raw power. To Odysseus, She offered guidance on his long voyage home from Troy. Disguised as mentors, strangers, even children, she whispered strategy and resilience into his heart. It was her presence, subtle, patient, that helped him return to Ithaca. To Diomedes, in the heart of the Trojan War, she granted courage and clarity. With her aid, he wounded even the gods. Yet for all her wisdom, Athena was not without sharpness. She valued discipline and often punished arrogance, particularly in the realm of skill and craft. There was the tale of Arachne, a mortal woman who boasted that her weaving surpassed even the goddesses. Athena, cloaked in disguise, warned her to show humility, but Arachne refused. So Athena challenged her to a contest. They both wove, Athena depicting the glory of the gods, their justice, their grace. Arachne, bold and unflinching, wove scenes of divine mistakes, of betrayal and cruelty. Her work was flawless, perfect, but it was insolent. Athena, though secretly impressed, tore the tapestry to shreds in fury. Arachne, shamed, tried to take her own life. But Athena, with both pity and punishment, transformed her into a spider, forever weaving, forever spinning. Thus, spiders were born, patient, precise, and always crafting. Athena herself was ever chaste, untouched by marriage or seduction. She stood apart from Aphrodite's sway, from Hera's bonds, from the entanglements of desire. She was thought distilled, focus made flesh. Her temples were not filled with song or revelry, but with quiet reverence. In ivory and gold, her statues towered over marble halls. Eyes steady, spear in hand, the owl of wisdom perched beside her. Even in the darkest times, mortals looked to her not for miracles, but for guidance. When storms gathered, they asked, "What must we build to survive?" When wars threatened, they asked, "What path leads to just victory?" And when choices loomed heavy, they asked, "What is the wisest course, even if it is not the easiest?" Athena answered not with prophecy, but with thought. She lived in the flicker of inspiration before invention, in the steady hand of the builder, in the measured words of the diplomat. In every solution that required patience over violence, she was present, and though her voice was quieter than thunder, it rang in the minds of mortals long after the storm had passed. She was Athena, born of thought, armored in truth, eternal in wisdom. Beneath the marble serenity of Athena's temples and beyond the clamor of Olympus's golden halls, there stirred another force, less orderly, less predictable, and far more primal. It did not march like war, nor bloom like wisdom. It surged, sudden and irresistible, like laughter in still air or madness in the quietest hour of the night. This was the presence of Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, theater, and sacred chaos. He was not among the oldest Olympians. His path to divinity was long, winding, and marked by pain and revelation. Born of an unusual union, mortal and god, his very existence blurred boundaries. Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, had caught the eye of Zeus. Their love, though forbidden, was deep. But Hera, ever watchful, disguised herself as an old woman and whispered doubt into Semele's heart. "Why has he never shown you his true form?" Hera asked. Tempted and uncertain, Semele begged Zeus to reveal himself in all his divine glory. Bound by oath, Zeus complied, and in that moment the full blaze of his presence consumed her. From the ashes he rescued the unborn child, his son. Zeus stitched the baby into his own thigh, hiding him from Hera's vengeance. When the time came, the boy was born a second time, not from a mother's womb, but from the flesh of lightning itself. Thus, Dionysus earned his title, twice born. But even then, he was not safe. Hera's fury chased him across the world. To protect him, Zeus entrusted the child to nymphs in the faraway lands of Nysa, a place untouched by sorrow, wild with vines and songbirds. There Dionysus grew among ivy and fig trees, his laughter echoing like wind chimes through the forests. As he matured, he learned the secrets of fermentation, of turning grapes into wine, of awakening the divine within the mundane. His rites were not taught in temples, but through experience. The letting go, the ecstatic dance, the embrace of what lies just beyond reason. Dionysus did not ask for worship. He invited it, and once invited, it was impossible to resist. His followers, known as Maenads or Bacchantes, were often women who had shed the strict garments of daily life. They roamed mountains and forests, intoxicated not just with wine, but with divine frenzy. They danced, sang, and at times tore through illusion and flesh alike. For Dionysus's gift was twofold: joy and madness, pleasure and surrender. His arrival in a city was never quiet. He brought music, wild animals, painted masks, and shifting identities. The very shape of the world seemed to bend in his presence. Structures, both literal and social, trembled, yet behind the madness was truth. For Dionysus was also the god of theater, where mortals wore masks to reveal the soul. His festivals gave birth to drama, tragedy and comedy, reflection and release. In the sacred theaters of Athens, crowds would gather beneath open skies to watch actors channel gods, kings, and fools. Through story, they explored grief, joy, fear, all under Dionysus's gaze. But the god was not always welcomed. In one tale, he returned to Thebes, the city of his mother, to prove his divinity. The ruling king Pentheus mocked his rights, called him a fraud, and sought to imprison him. Dionysus, serene and smiling, allowed himself to be bound, but the chains slipped like water from his wrists. He led Pentheus in disguise into the hills to spy on the frenzied Maenads. But in their trance, they saw only a threat, and so the king was torn apart, not by an enemy army, but by his own mother Gave, blinded by ecstasy. It was a brutal lesson: deny Dionysus and be unraveled. Still, he was not vengeful by nature. He offered freedom, a dangerous kind, yes, but one rooted in understanding. In surrendering control, mortals found something deeper than reason: catharsis, connection, the sacred space beyond thought. In another tale, Dionysus encountered a group of pirates who tried to kidnap him, hoping to ransom this strange, radiant youth. But the gods smiled as the ship sailed into open water. Vines crawled up the mast, wine poured from the deck, lions and panthers appeared from nowhere. The sailors, mad with fear, leapt into the sea. Dionysus, ever merciful, transformed them into dolphins. He taught that even punishment could be transformative. Though not always counted among the original 12 Olympians, Dionysus claimed his place through experience. He was not the god of the polished altar, but of the firelit glade, not of polished law, but of instinct. He walked both with mortals and gods, in palaces and forests, in laughter and weeping. His presence marked the liminal spaces, dusk, twilight, moments of transition and transformation. To worship Dionysus was to let go, to dance until the self vanished, to sing until the world dissolved, to drink, not for numbness, but for revelation. He was the god of breaking and of rebuilding from that break. In masks and mirrors, in clinking cups and shouts in the night, Dionysus lived. And mortals, whether they knew it or not, sought him. Every time they reached for something beyond themselves, something wild, something true. He was madness, he was music, he was joy that trembled on the edge of sorrow, and he would always return. Beyond the revelries of Dionysus and the stern discipline of Athena, there stood a presence on Olympus both silent and enduring, often overlooked but never absent. Her fire burned not in the heavens or the forge, but in every home, in every temple, in every heart where mortals gathered for warmth and peace. She was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, of domestic harmony, and of sacred flame. The eldest child of Cronus and Rhea, and the first to be swallowed by her father, Hestia was also the last to be released, emerging from that long darkness quiet and calm, the same way she would always be known. Unlike her siblings who claimed dramatic thrones and thunderous domains, Zeus with his skies, Poseidon with his oceans, Hades with the underworld, Hestia chose simplicity. She asked for no crown, no chariot, no thunderbolt or scepter. Instead, she asked for the center, not of power, but of presence. I wish to dwell, she said to Zeus, in the homes of gods and men alike. Let me tend the sacred fire and watch over every offering made. And Zeus, with respect, granted her request. From that day forth, every home, every temple, every city-state bore a flame that represented Hestia, a fire that was never allowed to die. It was from her flame that other fires were lit. It was at her hearth that meals began. She presided over beginnings, over peace, over the simple, sacred act of gathering. Though she had suitors, Poseidon, god of the seas, and Apollo, lord of light and music, Hestia refused them both. She chose virginity, not out of aloofness, but as a vow of devotion to all. She was unclaimed and unpossessable, and in that way, she belonged to everyone. Mortals honored her first and last at every sacrifice. Before the meat was placed upon the altar, a pinch was thrown into the hearth for Hestia. At the end of each feast, wine was poured for her. Every embassy between city-states carried a flame from Hestia's hearth, a sign that peace was present, that trust burned between strangers. And in the great cities, her role was more than symbolic. In the heart of every polis, there stood a public hearth, the Prytaneon, where her fire was kept burning by priestesses. This flame was the soul of the city, its constancy a reminder that civilization itself was woven from warmth and mutual care. Hestia never entered into quarrels. She did not descend to the battlefield nor intervene in the loves of mortals. She made no boasts, she played no tricks, and yet, even in her stillness, she held sway. Her presence brought sanctuary. When a refugee fled danger, they could clasp the hearth and invoke her name, and none could harm them while they remained there. When travelers came bearing tales and gifts, they were welcomed first by the hearth before any god was named. And though she did not command the grand temples of Athena or the dramatic rites of Dionysus, Hestia's worship was constant. Every family, every fire, every quiet moment between strangers warmed by a common flame, that was Hestia's temple. Even among the gods, she was revered for her gentleness. She poured wine for Olympus's banquets. She listened without judgment. She offered warmth where there was cold, steadiness where there was unrest. And when later in myth, Dionysus ascended to Olympus and the number of thrones threatened to exceed 12, it was Hestia who stood and offered hers. "I do not need a seat to be present," she said, and so she stepped away, not in exile, but in quiet choice. In that act, she taught Olympus something rare: humility without loss, power without demand, presence without noise. Her myths are few, but her influence is immeasurable. For what story is not rooted in a place of safety? What home can exist without a center, a flame to cook by, to gather around, to return to? Hestia is that center. She is the glow in winter, the soft crackle of firewood, the silence after a meal shared between loved ones. She is the first spark that marks a birth and the final ember at the end of a long life. She is the gentle flicker in the background of every epic, the invisible thread holding gods and mortals alike together. And though few statues of her remain, and though her name is not cried out in war or love, she endures, not in marble, but in flame. In the twilight hours, when torches flickered in quiet temples and stars stretched like silent witnesses across the heavens, there remained a god whose presence was often misunderstood, neither resounding like Zeus's thunder, nor whispering like Hestia's hearth, but something in between, hidden, distant, necessary. This was Hephaestus, the divine smith, god of fire, forge, metalwork, and craftsmanship, a creator who built not only weapons and wonders, but the very foundation upon which Olympus stood. His birth was marked by conflict, a painful origin that would forever shape his story. Some said that Hera, weary of Zeus's many infidelities, decided to bear a child of her own without union, and so, in anger and pride, she gave birth to Hephaestus. But when she looked upon him, small, misshapen, imperfect, she recoiled. In some versions of the tale, she cast him from Olympus in shame. Others tell of Zeus who, during a quarrel with Hephaestus, hurled him from the heavens in a rage. He fell for an entire day and night, crashing into the sea with such force that the waves themselves groaned. There, beneath the water's surface, the sea goddesses Thetis and Eurynome took pity on the child. They raised him in a hidden grotto, surrounded by coral and silence, where the boy who had been rejected began to create. With fire and hammer, he shaped glowing bronze and shimmering gold. His hands, though scarred, were steady. His eyes, though shadowed, gleamed with focus. He built automatons of metal that moved with grace. He sculpted jewelry from pearls and volcanic stone. And slowly, the boy who had fallen became a master of beauty and function. When the gods discovered his talents, they summoned him back to Olympus, not with love perhaps, but with need. And so Hephaestus returned, limping, proud, and quiet, bearing his tools and the knowledge of flame. In the heart of Olympus, he built his forge, its bellows fed by the breath of underground winds, its fires fueled by volcanic veins. From this sacred place, he crafted the divine. He built Zeus's thunderbolts, each one humming with skyborn fury. He forged Achilles' armor, a masterpiece of protection, engraved with images of the world, war and peace, birth and death, the cycle of mortal life captured in gold and iron. He made Hermes' winged sandals, Apollo's golden chariot, and even the great shield of Heracles. But perhaps his most delicate work was Pandora, the first woman shaped by divine instruction. At Zeus's command, Hephaestus molded her from clay with exquisite precision. She was gifted by each god with talents and traits, beauty, voice, curiosity. But it was Hephaestus who gave her form. Yet even among gods, Hephaestus remained an outsider. He was given Aphrodite as a bride, the most beautiful among the immortals, but not through courtship or shared passion. Zeus offered her to Hephaestus as a prize, perhaps as payment for his craftsmanship, or perhaps as a way to bind Aphrodite's wild heart to something stable. But Aphrodite's love was never his. She drifted into Ares' arms, and Hephaestus, wounded once more, discovered the affair. He did not roar. He did not strike. Instead, he built a trap, invisible chains of woven metal so fine they could not be seen. He caught them in their secret embrace and summoned the gods to witness the shame. Laughter rang through Olympus, but it was not the laughter of cruelty. It was the laughter of discomfort, of masks dropped. Hephaestus said nothing. He released them both and returned to his forge. He did not demand affection. He poured his pain into creation. And in that, he found something deeper than beauty: purpose. Hephaestus became the patron of artisans, blacksmiths, and inventors. He belonged not to war or philosophy, but to the hammer and anvil. Where other gods ruled with lightning or wisdom, he ruled with skill. Mortal craftsmen prayed to him not with poetry, but with calloused hands, with smoke and soot. In smoky workshops, surrounded by sparks and steel, they felt him. Every time a blade was tempered, every time molten metal danced, his spirit was present. And despite his pain, Hephaestus was generous. He built automatons, golden beings with thought and movement, to assist him in his work. He crafted mechanical doors for Olympus that opened on their own, long before such dreams ever touched mortal minds. He made tripods with wheels, tools that could move and think. His forge was a realm of innovation, centuries ahead of its time. But Hephaestus's greatest strength was endurance. He did not fight with spears or plot with cunning words. He endured rejection, betrayal, and exile, and turned them into creation, into brilliance, into legacy. The gods might not have sung his name in ballads, but without him, they would have had no weapons, no palaces, no thrones. Hephaestus was the foundation beneath Olympus, and in every fire-lit workshop, in every invention born of patience and grit, he is remembered, not with praise, but with quiet respect. For he is the god who fell and rose not with vengeance, but with mastery. And that, perhaps, is the greatest kind of strength. Far beyond Olympus's white-crowned peaks, and even deeper than Hephaestus's underground forges, there lay a realm shrouded in silence, not the silence of peace, but of endings. In this world, footsteps echoed like distant memory, and rivers flowed not with water, but with time itself. This was the realm of Hades, and among the many spirits that drifted like mist across its quiet plains, one figure stood apart. Not god, nor ghost, but something older. Her name was Nyx, goddess of night, not merely the darkness that followed sunset, but the primordial essence of night itself, the deep veil that covered existence before the gods were born. Even Zeus, with all his thunder and wrath, was said to fear her. She was one of the first beings, older than Olympus, older than Gaia and Uranus, even older than light. From the original void of chaos, Nyx had emerged alongside her brother Erebus, the god of shadow. Where Erebus cloaked the edges of existence, Nyx filled its heart. She was not cruel, nor kind. She simply was, eternal and unknowable. No temples were built in her name. No festivals honored her under the sun. But at night, when firelight flickered and the stars hung still, mortals and immortals alike whispered her name, for all things returned to her in time. Nyx dwelled in a palace of obsidian beyond the river Styx, where light could not reach. From there, she moved with silent grace through the veil of evening, bringing the world its cloak of stars. Every dusk she emerged, riding her chariot across the sky, her dark horses breathing moonless mist. But what made Nyx truly feared was her children. Alone, without consort, she bore beings that shaped the fabric of mortal experience. From her womb came not beauty or music, but the realities that mortals could neither escape nor ignore. There was Hypnos, the god of sleep, who laid his gentle fingers over the eyes of mortals and lulled even the gods into slumber. He lived in a quiet cave, surrounded by poppies and dreams that curled like fog through the air. His touch brought peace, but also vulnerability, for in sleep none could defend or disguise. Beside him moved his twin brother, Thanatos, the god of death, not violent or vengeful like Ares' battlefield carnage, but cold, quiet, inevitable. He came without sound, without argument. When Thanatos arrived, time stopped. From Nyx also came Morpheus, god of dreams, who shaped the images that danced through the minds of sleepers. He whispered stories behind closed eyelids, visions of lost loved ones, futures yet to unfold in places that never were but always felt real. Her children did not bring joy, necessarily, but they brought balance. She gave birth to Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution, the equalizer of hubris, the one who ensured that those who dared too high would fall. It was she who kept pride from poisoning greatness. Nyx also birthed Eris, the goddess of strife and discord, a shadow that slipped into gatherings and twisted joy into jealousy, love into rivalry. From her came the golden apple that sparked the Trojan War. Other children of Nyx were even more fearsome. The Keres, spirits of violent death, haunted battlefields, drinking the last breaths of the fallen. Apate, the spirit of deceit. Geras, the god of old age. Oisis, goddess of misery. These were not monsters but truths. Nyx did not create to harm, but to complete the world. Without sleep, there is madness. Without death, there is no meaning. Without night, light loses its wonder. Even the gods could not deny this. When Zeus once sought to punish Hypnos for putting him to sleep, an act that allowed Hera to scheme, he chased the god to the edge of the world. But when Hypnos fled to his mother, Zeus halted. He did not cross into Nyx's domain. He bowed his head, swallowed his anger, and left. Nyx was not a goddess to challenge, yet for all her distance, she was not malevolent. In the hush of night, lovers found one another. Children dreamt of stars. Poets penned verses with ink that only darkness could inspire. She was the pause between breaths, the sigh before sleep, the quiet that followed thunder. And while the Olympians bickered, fell in love, waged war, and sought worship, Nyx endured. She watched them all, as she had watched the Titans before them. She would watch the mortals after them, and she would remain long after their temples crumbled and their statues wore smooth in the wind. For the night was always waiting, not as punishment, but as return. And in that return, in that soft and endless dark, Nyx held the universe in her arms, cradling the world as it turned, letting all things drift into silence before the light would rise again. Far across the starlit expanse where Nyx's veil hung heavy over the world, and dreams gave way to waking breath, there stood another force, one not rooted in love or wisdom or war, but in something far more ancient, more relentless. The Fates, or as the Greeks knew them, the Moirai, watched the turning of the world not as rulers nor as judges, but as silent weavers of destiny. They did not speak often nor intervene with drama. But all gods, mortals, and even titans knew what the Fates spun, none could unspin. There were three of them, always three, and together they formed the eternal pattern of life itself. The first was Clotho, the spinner. With fingers pale and nimble, she spun the thread of life from her distaffs, forming it from the winds of birth and the breath of beginnings. She determined when a life would begin, the moment the soul stirred, the moment the eyes first opened. In her presence, everything felt new, a spark, a cry, a heartbeat. She wove without pause, often humming softly, a melody only newborns might recognize from the other side of the veil. The second was Lachesis, the measurer. She held a great rod and measured the threads spun by her sister. How long would a life last? How high would it climb? How far would it fall? She touched each destiny with a solemn, distant grace, her eyes clouded as though looking through time itself. She assigned fate, not with cruelty, but with balance. Kings and beggars alike received her judgment, and it made no difference to her whether the thread stretched over a battlefield or a cradle. She did not decide how a life would be lived, only how much of it would be granted. And then came the third, Atropos the cutter. She was the eldest, silent, with eyes that saw all things as if they had already passed. In her hand she held a pair of black shears, the blades glinting with inevitability. When the time came, whether long or short, she would sever the thread, cleanly, without ceremony, and life would end. Even the gods respected this moment. Even Zeus could not stay her hand. When Atropos cut, the soul drifted from the world, its journey complete. The Fates did not live on Olympus. They existed beyond it, in a place few dared approach, a quiet realm at the edge of night and time, where stars moved slowly and echoes came before sound. There their loom stood, a vast instrument of golden wood and dark stone, upon which the threads of every life shimmered like dew in morning light, each thread tangled with others, crossing, knotting, looping, forming the tapestry of all existence. It was not a straight weave, it was wild, beautiful, chaotic. Each life pulled upon another, causing ripples. A single decision, a step taken or not taken, a word spoken or swallowed, could shift the entire pattern. The Moirai saw it all. They did not change it. They simply recorded it, wove it, and ended it. Many feared them. Some tried to bribe them, kings who offered gold, mothers who begged for more time, heroes who hoped for second chances. But the fates were unmoved, not unkind, but unchanging, like the ocean, like the wind. And yet, even in their detachment, there was something sacred, for they reminded all beings, mortal or divine, that time was not limitless, that each moment held weight, that life was precious because it would end. There are stories where heroes attempt to defy them. One such tale tells of Alcestis, a queen who offered her life so her husband might live. As her thread neared its end, Heracles, the great hero, intervened, wrestling Thanatos himself to win her back. The fates, observing, did not interfere. Perhaps they had woven such interference into the thread itself. Another tale speaks of Meleager, whose life was tied to a burning log. When the log turned to ash, so would he. His mother, warned by prophecy, kept it hidden. But fate cannot be avoided, not forever. In a moment of rage and grief, she cast the log into the fire, and Meleager perished with its last ember. Even Achilles, destined for greatness and doom, knew the hour of his death had long been measured. He chose to fight anyway. And in that choice, to live brightly, briefly, the fates were honored. The gods, for all their power, could not erase fate. At times they tried to delay it. At times they whispered against it. But they never tore the thread from the loom. For even Olympus, in all its gold and song, cast shadows upon the pattern. Even the eternal bowed to the weavers. The fates reminded the world that power is fleeting, beauty fades, and glory must surrender to time. But they also gave a gift, meaning. For what is a life, if not made meaningful by its brevity? In the flicker of a candle, in the bloom of spring, in the final breath of a legend, the Moirai are present, watching, measuring, waiting. And when Atropos lifts her shears and the thread falls away, somewhere, Clotho is already reaching for a new strand. As the Moirai quietly spun the threads of destiny beneath the hush of time itself, another force pulsed through the world, fiercer, swifter, and more consuming. It moved not through looms or scrolls, but in the hearts of mortals and gods alike. It needed no language, for it was older than speech. It struck like lightning, bloomed like fire, and devoured like hunger. This force was Eros. To mortals, he was often imagined as a cherubic youth with wings, a bow in hand, arrows tipped with gold or lead. But in the older myths, Eros was something far more ancient, one of the primordial beings born from chaos itself, or perhaps from Nyx and Erebus, depending on the tale. Before Gaia bore the land and Uranus crowned the sky, before Titans and Olympians ruled, there was Eros, a divine impulse, the force that drew things together, that stirred life from stillness, that awakened desire from the void. He was not merely the god of love. He was the force of attraction, the great bond that held atoms in embrace, that pulled gods toward mortals, mortals toward dreams, and dreams toward ruin or glory. Where Eros moved, the world shifted. Hearts kindled, wars began. Songs were written, and empires fell. His arrows did not always bring joy. The golden-tipped ones inspired affection, yes, devotion, yearning, the aching need to be close. But the lead-tipped arrows brought disdain, indifference, or even repulsion. With a flick of his wrist, Eros could twist a kingdom into madness or mend a war with longing. He was worshipped, feared, and sometimes cursed. Even the gods were not safe from him. Ares, the embodiment of raw war, softened in Eros' presence when touched by Aphrodite's eyes. Apollo, radiant and proud, once mocked Eros, claiming that his bow, small and delicate, was no match for his own. Eros, offended, struck Apollo with a golden arrow and the nymph Daphne with lead. The result was agony. Apollo burned with love, while Daphne fled in horror. Her transformation into a laurel tree became one of the most haunting legacies of Eros' power. Yet for all his mischief and influence, Eros was also vulnerable to his own force. His most poignant story is entwined with that of Psyche, a mortal woman whose beauty rivaled the goddesses themselves. So radiant was Psyche that mortals began to abandon Aphrodite's temples to worship her instead. Jealous and offended, the goddess commanded her son Eros to strike Psyche with a golden arrow and make her fall in love with something hideous, perhaps a monster, perhaps even death. But when Eros approached Psyche, he saw her sleeping soft and glowing in lamplight. He hesitated. He leaned too close, and in a twist of divine irony, he pricked himself with his own arrow. He fell in love. It was not the passing enchantment he so often inflicted upon others. It was deep, real, consuming. Unable to defy his mother openly, Eros arranged for Psyche to be taken to a hidden palace where he visited her each night. He spoke to her in darkness, never allowing her to see his face, but showering her with tenderness and joy. For a time she was content, but curiosity is its own form of hunger. One night, Psyche lit a lamp. She gazed upon Eros as he slept. Golden skin, wings folded like moonlit silk, a god in the quietest form. A single drop of oil from her lamp fell upon his shoulder. He awoke. The illusion shattered. Betrayed and wounded, Eros vanished. What followed was a journey of suffering and transformation. Psyche wandered the earth in search of her lost love. She faced impossible trials set by Aphrodite, sorting mountains of seeds, retrieving water from the underworld, delivering a box of divine beauty. She failed, she stumbled, but she persisted. And Eros, watching her from afar, saw not just her beauty, but her strength. At last, he defied his mother, flew to Olympus, and pleaded their case before Zeus. Zeus, moved by the purity of their bond, granted Psyche immortality. She drank the nectar of the gods and was reborn among them. Thus, love and soul, for that is what Psyche means, were joined forever. Eros, once a force untamed, found a mirror of himself in the devotion of another. Together, they became symbols of love's transformative power, its ability to burn, to bruise, to elevate, and to transcend even mortality. In later ages, Eros would be softened, romanticized, reduced to candlelit hearts and whispered poems. But his true nature remained, a force both creative and destructive, divine and chaotic, capable of setting the stars trembling and turning the smallest mortal gesture into something eternal. He did not speak often, but his arrows never missed. And in every glance held too long, in every touch that lingered, in every heartbeat that quickened without reason, Eros was there, watching, waiting, smiling. Beneath the shifting winds of longing stirred by Eros, and beyond the silent judgment of the fates, there existed a power more elusive, more fragile, yet equally enduring. A power not bound by steel or prophecy, but by the deep-rooted rhythm of the earth. This was the power of Demeter, goddess of grain, harvest, and the eternal cycle of life and decay. She was not the brightest star in Olympus, nor the loudest voice in its great halls. But where other gods ruled with spectacle, Demeter governed with patience. In the slow swelling of seeds, in the whisper of wheat fields, in the sigh of soil after rain. Born of Cronus and Rhea, she was sister to Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and elder to many of the younger gods. Her presence was maternal, not only in form, but in function. While others sought worship in temples of marble, Demeter was honored on the plains, valleys, and vine-wrapped hills, where food was grown, and the line between survival and despair was thin. Her hands were the color of ripe barley. Her breath smelled of new bread. Her footsteps, even when unmarked, left life in their wake. But Demeter's story was never fully her own. It was shared forever with her daughter. Persephone. A child of sunlight and blossoms, Persephone was the very essence of spring. She laughed easily, sang to the flowers, and made garlands from meadows that followed her as she danced. Demeter loved her fiercely. She kept her close, teaching her the secrets of seed and soil, the song of grain in the wind, the names of every herb. But fate, quiet and watching, had other plans. We've heard this tale before in the deep echoes of Hades' underworld, but from Demeter's eyes it was different. It did not begin with a love story. It began with a scream. One day, Persephone wandered away, drawn by a strange flower that bloomed alone in a field, a trap planted by Gaia at Zeus's behest. As she bent to pluck it, the ground tore open with a roar. From its depths surged Hades, black horses foaming, chariot gleaming like obsidian. He seized her. and in a blink, the earth swallowed them both. Demeter heard the echo. She ran to the spot where the flower had once been, but there was no blood, no trace, only silence and a single petal drifting through the air. From that moment, Demeter searched. For 9 days, she wandered without food or rest, torch in each hand, scouring the earth, questioning gods and mortals alike. The sun passed above her, but she did not notice. Rivers changed course under her feet, but she did not pause. She became wild, weathered by grief. It was Hecate, the goddess of crossroads and shadows, who finally whispered the truth. Helios saw it. The sun watched. Demeter turned to the sun god, and Helios, bound to truth, reluctantly told her everything. Persephone had been taken, not by force alone, but by permission. Zeus had agreed. Betrayed by brother, by king, by law itself, Demeter withdrew. She abandoned Olympus. She wandered among mortals, disguised as an old woman cloaked in gray. She came to Eleusis, where she was taken in by a kind family and served as a nurse to their infant son. In gratitude, she tried to grant the child immortality, anointing him in divine oil, passing him through sacred fire. But his mother interrupted the ritual in fear. Demeter, heartbroken anew, revealed her true form. Golden and terrible, she built a temple there and sat in silence. And as she mourned, the world changed. The earth ceased to yield, crops withered, trees bore no fruit, cattle starved, and the rivers ran low. Mortals cried out to the heavens, but no answer came. Only drought, only hunger. Even the gods grew restless. Zeus, seeing humanity falter, finally acted. He sent Hermes to the underworld with a message for Hades, return the girl, and Hades agreed, but not before offering Persephone a single fruit, a pomegranate, crimson and glistening. She ate 6 seeds, so the compromise was forged. For 6 months, Persephone would walk the earth, bringing spring in her footsteps, and for 6, she would return to Hades, queen of the underworld. Demeter accepted, but she was never the same. She had learned what all mothers fear, that even love cannot shield from loss, and that joy and sorrow are twin seeds in the same soil. And thus the seasons were born. In spring and summer, Persephone returned. Flowers opened, bees hummed, and Demeter's smile warmed the wind. But in autumn, as the leaves turned and the grain was harvested, her daughter prepared to descend. And in winter, Demeter wept, quietly, slowly, covering the earth in frost and sleep. Yet she always waited, always believed in the return. Demeter became more than a goddess of grain. She was the keeper of cycles, the guardian of return, the one who taught that life is not a straight line, but a spiral of planting, growing, reaping, and resting. Her mystery rites at Eleusis promised mortals a glimpse of this truth, that death was not an ending, but a season, one that would always turn again. And in every loaf of bread, every seed pressed into soil, every hand that touched earth with hope, she lived. High upon Olympus, where the sky shimmered like hammered silver, and gods debated in voices that echoed through eternity, there existed a god who seldom joined the din. He did not seek thunder or prophecy, nor did he command battlefields or harvests. Instead, he moved quietly through the corners of divinity, his gaze ever fixed on boundaries, messages, and balance. This was Hades, the god of the underworld, brother to Zeus and Poseidon, and ruler of all that lay beneath the surface of life. We have spoken his name in passing, his shadow present in tales of Persephone, of death, of finality. But now we walk with him more closely, not as a stranger cloaked in darkness, but as a figure of order, of gravity, and above all, inevitability. Unlike his brothers, Hades did not command sky or sea. When the cosmos was divided by lot after the fall of the Titans, he drew the realm of the dead. While Zeus claimed the heavens and Poseidon the oceans, Hades accepted his dominion with no protest, no joy, no sorrow, only silence. He descended. But what he built beneath the earth was not a prison. It was a kingdom. The underworld was vast and layered, a place of rivers and memories, of shadows and quiet law. It was not hell, not in the way later cultures would define it, but a realm of rest, judgment, and balance. At its entrance flowed the river Styx, black and glistening, whose waters bound gods to oaths none could break. Those who swore falsely by Styx invited death or exile, for even immortals bent to its authority. Beyond Styx lay other rivers, Lethe, the river of forgetting, where souls drank to shed the weight of their lives. Acheron, river of sorrow, whose current carried grief like fallen leaves. Phlegethon, the river of fire, not torment but purification, and Cocytus, the river of lamentation. Each river had its own sound, its own story. To cross into the underworld, souls were ferried by Charon, the skeletal boatman with hollow eyes and an outstretched hand. A coin placed beneath the tongue of the dead paid for passage. Those without it wandered the shore for eternity. Hades stood beyond these waters, crowned not with gold but with obsidian, his scepter not jeweled but forged from the root of the world. His eyes did not burn, but saw deeply. He was stern, yes, and often feared, but he was also just. He did not torment the dead, he judged them. Together with the ancient kings, Madamanthus and Aeacus, he ruled over the sorting of souls. Those who had lived with honor and virtue were sent to the Elysian fields, where eternal spring danced in golden wheat. There, poets and heroes reclined beneath trees that never withered, their laughter soft as wind. Those who had lived in cruelty or excess faced Tartarus, the pit far below, where punishment was exact and unceasing. Here, the worst offenders, tyrants, traitors, oathbreakers, faced not flame, but the mirror of their own deeds. And most souls, neither wicked nor heroic, drifted in the asphodel fields, a gray plain of memory and forgetfulness, where they wandered in gentle obscurity, like shadows cast by clouds. Hades did not seek worship among mortals. His temples were few. His name was rarely spoken aloud, and when it was often softened. Plum, the wealthy one, for all the riches of the earth eventually fell into his hands. Gold, silver, jewels, bones. He was wealth, yes, but the kind measured not in coin, but in permanence. And he did not meddle in the affairs of Olympus unless provoked. When mortals spoke of death, they often feared Hades. But it was not he who brought death. That belonged to Thanatos, the quiet son of Nyx. Hades merely received the soul, sheltered it, and ensured it was placed where it belonged. And yet, for all his distance, Hades was not without love. His union with Persephone, queen of the underworld, once goddess of spring, was complex, forged in shadows and longing, in duality. With her, the underworld changed. Flowers of pale silver bloomed in the caverns, the dead found gentler dreams. Even Hades, ever still, softened in her presence. He built her a throne beside his own, and when she left for 6 months each year, the halls dimmed further, as if the very stones missed her footsteps. He never sought another. Among the gods, Hades was respected, if not beloved. He was a constant, unchanging, incorruptible. He did not indulge in quarrels, seductions, or schemes. He upheld cosmic law. And even Zeus, mighty though he was, feared breaking the order Hades enforced, for death once granted could not be revoked. Still, there were exceptions. Orpheus, who played his lyre so beautifully that Hades wept and allowed his beloved Eurydice a chance to return to life. But even in mercy the rules remained. Orpheus must not look back, and he did, thus proving that even love, when it doubts, can fail the test of fate. Hades turned away, the gates closed, but he remained as always watching, waiting, not with malice, but with the unblinking patience of stone. He was not evil, he was inevitable. And as the world above bloomed and burned, as temples rose and fell, the realm of Hades endured below, unchanged and eternal, where all threads, no matter how bright, would one day descend and find rest in his quiet, shadowed halls. While the great halls of Olympus echoed with immortal footsteps and the underworld slumbered in shadow and stillness, another force weaved silently through the world, subtle, veiled, and yet sharper than any blade. It passed through doorways, lingered at the edge of dreams, and waited at every fork in the road. This was the realm of Hecate, goddess of magic, crossroads, witchcraft, and the hidden knowledge that mortals feared and longed for in equal measure. She did not walk among the 12 Olympians, and yet her power predated many. She was old, older than Zeus, some whispered. Born of the Titans Perses and Asteria, she existed before the war that cast the old gods into darkness. And when the dust settled and Olympus rose in victory, Hecate remained. Zeus, recognizing her strength and mystery, granted her honors above all, dominion over sky, earth, and sea, the triple world. She did not boast of this, nor did she wield it in grand display. Instead, Hecate walked alone between shadows, touching the edges of things, the liminal spaces, the places where change happens. She was most often seen at night, when torches flickered and silence pressed like velvet on the world. Travelers met her at crossroads, where three paths diverged and choices carried weight. She would not decide for them, but her presence was a warning. What you choose, you become. In one hand, she carried a torch to light the way in darkness. In the other, sometimes a key, symbol of doors opened, thresholds crossed. Mortals feared her, yes, but they also trusted her, especially women, especially those who lived on the margins, midwives, herbalists, and those called witches by fearful tongues. Hecate was their protector, their muse, their silent guide in the forest at midnight. In the myths, she rarely intervened openly, but when Demeter wandered the world in grief, seeking Persephone, it was Hecate who came to her aid. She heard the girl's cries when no other did. She brought Demeter to Helios, the all-seeing sun, and thus began the path toward understanding and later reunion. Hecate became a companion to Persephone in the underworld, a presence that moved between the living and the dead. She was not bound by either realm. She drifted in both. In magic, she reigned supreme. The ancient Greeks did not see magic as whimsy, but as a sacred secret language that touched the unseen world. Spells, potions, omens, these belonged to Hecate. Her name was invoked in rituals that sought clarity or protection. Offerings of bread, honey, garlic, and black dogs were left at crossroads during the dark moon when her presence was strongest. She was the unseen guardian in childbirth, where life and death hovered near. She stood with those who crossed borders, physical or spiritual. She was present at every beginning and ending, though never the cause of either. She had no throne in Olympus, no palace carved in cloud or marble, but she had shrines, humble and hidden, marked with torches and dogs and offerings left in silence. The poets spoke her name with reverence, and the mystics carved her symbols, the triple moon, the crescent, the snake, into amulets and stones. Her image was often triple-faced, for she saw past, present, and future at once. Maiden, mother, crone. She embodied all phases of life and guided those passing through each. Though she rarely took lovers or bore children in the grand style of other gods, she was deeply maternal in her own way, fiercely protective, fiercely wise, fiercely watching. Even Hermes, swift messenger and guide of souls, nodded in respect when they crossed paths. Where he moved quickly through the world's visible layers, Hecate walked in the in-between. She was the whisper before a decision, the flicker at the edge of a flame, the feeling that you are not alone when you stand at a threshold. And while others sought dominion over land, sky, or war, Hecate ruled choice. Not the grand ones sung in legend, but the quiet ones, the kind that change a life forever. Do you turn left or right? Do you speak the truth or remain silent? Do you forgive or let the wound remain? In those moments, her torch glows behind your shoulder. No command, no pressure, just presence, watching, waiting, bearing witness. She reminds us that power lies not always in action, but in awareness, that the true magic is not in forcing the world to change, but in seeing clearly when it already has. And so she endures, not on high thrones or in golden tails, but in the hushed breaths between moments, in the rustle of wind at dusk, in the silence that falls when choices hang heavy in the air. Hecate, the veiled one, the pathfinder, the keeper of doors, the light that flickers, never fading, at the heart of all crossroads. As night deepened and Hecate's torch dimmed along the path of choices, another divine presence stirred, not in the quiet spaces between stars, but in the places where voices rose, where words danced, and where the power of speech held more sway than sword or flame. This was Iris, the goddess of the rainbow, the divine messenger of the gods, and the thread of color that stitched together sky, sea, and land. Unlike Hermes, who moved with speed and trickery, Iris carried her messages with grace, swiftness, and a shimmering dignity. She did not boast, did not steal, and did not play games with fate. Her presence was fleeting but profound, like a sudden rainbow after a storm, a bridge between heavens and earth that appeared only when truly needed. She was born of Thaumas, a marine god, and Electra, a cloud nymph, her lineage already a blending of water and sky. And so it was only natural that Iris moved between them. When she ran, her path arced across the air, painting the sky with fleeting color. Rainbows were her footprints. In her hand, she carried a golden ewer filled with water from the river Styx, a sacred vessel with which she could swear unbreakable oaths or purify divine messages. Her robes shimmered with hues no mortal language could name. Her wings, delicate as dragonfly lace, beat soundlessly. When she descended to the earth, even silence seemed to sigh. Though she is not always present in the great dramas of Olympus, Iris played a crucial role in the world of gods and mortals alike. When Hera wished to send a command that must be obeyed, she turned not to Hermes, but to Iris. For Iris did not interpret messages. She delivered them exactly as spoken. She was truth in motion, the clarity that cut through noise. During the great war between the Olympians and the Titans, Iris flew with lightning speed, delivering orders, gathering intelligence, weaving strategy. Her loyalty never wavered, her presence never delayed. In a realm filled with ego and vanity, she was purpose without pride. Mortals occasionally glimpsed her at the edge of vision, especially after storms. A rainbow touching the sea was not just a trick of light, but a sign. Iris had passed this way, perhaps to carry a prayer from a grieving mother, or to whisper a warning to a wise king. She served not only Hera, but the entire pantheon when needed. To Demeter, she brought comfort during her search for Persephone. To Achilles, in his grief for Patroclus, she brought the will of Zeus. To Iris, no task was too small if it was born from true need. Her rainbow was not merely a visual wonder, but a symbol of connection, a bridge between realms, a path between gods and mortals, between the seen and the unseen. In some later tales, when the gods grew silent and worship faded, Iris remained. She became the last lingering link between the divine and the mortal world, delivering hope in colors, speaking in storms that ended with light. She never demanded temples or sacrifice. Her gift was always fleeting, beautiful, ephemeral, remembered like a half-forgotten dream. But for those who listened, who watched carefully, she still moved. In the quiet after rainfall, when light breaks through gray and a spectrum stretches across the sky, that is Iris, glancing back at a world that barely remembers her name. She asks nothing, only that we see, only that we remember that messages matter, that words when carried faithfully can bind or mend, that a single act delivered in sincerity can change the course of things. And so Iris endures, not with thrones or lightning or golden laurels, but with a streak of color, a hush in the air, and a reminder that even the smallest moment of grace can bridge worlds. A whisper between gods, a shimmer between storms, a promise painted in light. Beneath the painted arc of Iris's flight and beyond the whispering threads of Hecate's crossroads, there stirred in the world a force far more unforgiving, far more unchangeable, and yet one that sat at the very core of justice among gods and mortals alike. This was the realm of Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, of balance restored, of divine indignation toward excess and arrogance. In an age when kings declared themselves gods, when warriors believed themselves untouchable, when mortals overstepped the boundaries set by fate, it was Nemesis who answered, not with thunder or sword, but with a gaze so sharp it could pierce certainty and a silence that stripped lies bare. Her name meant to give what is due, not cruelty, not vengeance, simply what is owed. She was often mistaken for a goddess of punishment, but punishment was only part of her nature. In truth, Nemesis was the shadow of justice, the equalizer, the force that brought hubris, the dangerous overconfidence that lured mortals and even gods into ruin, back into proportion. She existed not to cause suffering, but to prevent imbalance. Her origins were veiled in older myths. Some called her the daughter of Nyx, born of the night like the Fates, Thanatos, and Eris. Others whispered she was the child of Oceanus, the primal water that knew no shore. Wherever she came from, Nemesis stood apart from the whims of Olympus. She served order, not the Olympian order, but a deeper, older symmetry. Her appearance was measured, precise. She carried a measuring rod, a scale, sometimes a wheel, symbolizing the turn of fortune. In some depictions, she bore a sword for swift justice, and in others, wings for retribution that could reach any height. She wore a crown not of gold, but of iron, unbending, weighty, firm. One of the earliest stories tied to her name is that of Narcissus, a youth so beautiful that others fell hopelessly in love with him. Yet he returned none of their affections. He mocked those who admired him, scorning their longing. Eventually, one who had suffered his coldness called upon Nemesis. She listened, and she led Narcissus to a pool, still deep and silver like a mirror. There, he saw his own reflection for the first time, and he fell in love. Consumed by his own image, unable to look away, he wasted into nothing, leaving behind only the flower that bears his name. It was not vengeance. It was reflection, literal and metaphorical. A balance struck between the self and the world. Nemesis did not walk often among the other gods. She had no throne, no palace, but she was known and she was respected. Even Zeus, the king of gods, the wielder of thunder, did not cross her lightly. For while he ruled Olympus, Nemesis guarded a law greater than sovereignty, limit. Even divinity had edges. Even immortals had lines not to be crossed. And when those lines were blurred, she came. In war, when generals grew drunk on victory and slaughtered without cause, she watched. In peace, when rulers grew fat on their own praises and forgot the humble beginnings of their people, she watched. When mortals raised temples to themselves, when poets claimed truth without wisdom, when cities raised statues not in reverence but in self-worship, she watched. And when the time came, she did not strike in haste. She whispered into the ear of fate. She tilted the scale ever so slightly, and fortune turned. To worship Nemesis was to accept one's place, not in shame, but in reverence for proportion. She taught that success was not evil, but pride untempered was fatal. That joy was not forbidden, but to build joy atop the suffering of others invited ruin. Some cults worshipped her as Adrastea, the inescapable one. Not because she pursued with anger, but because truth, once summoned, cannot be outrun. In the later myths, she became a quieter figure. Her name invoked in courtrooms, whispered in the ears of those about to make irreversible decisions. She lingered at the edge of oaths. She stood beneath the dais where kings were crowned. And though she never claimed dominion over the dead, her shadow fell on tombs of those who had fallen by their own hand, or by the long, slow arc of justice. Nemesis is not feared. She is the breath before correction, the tide that washes too high towers from the sand. The mirror, placed gently before the face, asking only that you see. She endures not in praise, but in the quiet alignment of the world. When good fortune is matched with gratitude, when power is tempered with humility, and when every voice, no matter how small, is heard by the scales she holds steady. In every age, there are those who forget their limits, and in every age, Nemesis waits, not to punish, to remind. As dawn broke softly across the edges of the mythic world, washing Olympus in gentle hues of rose and gold, the final whispers of the old stories lingered in the morning air. Not with thunder, not with mourning, but with a kind of settled stillness, like the last page of a well-worn book turning itself closed. We arrive now at the final part of this long and winding tale, and fittingly, we return to a figure who, though not a king, nor a warrior, nor a god of vengeance or storm, touched every corner of the world, seen and unseen. This was Gaia, the earth herself. Not a goddess who sat upon a throne, nor one who bore weapons or commands. She was the beginning, the end, and the everlasting ground upon which all gods tread and all mortals are born, toil, and return. She did not ascend to Olympus, for she was older than Olympus, older than the Titans, older even than time, in the way that time matters to those who walk upon it. Gaia was born of chaos, not from a mother or father, but from the great unformed potential that stirred at the edge of the void. From this swirling silence, she emerged as the foundation of all existence. The earth made flesh, green and fertile, vast and knowing. Her body was the land, the mountains her bones, the rivers her veins, the forests her breath, and the oceans her cradle. To speak of Gaia is to speak not just of creation, but of continuity. She gave birth to Uranus, the sky, and Pontus, the sea. With them, she brought forth the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the Hecatoncheires. From her womb came the seeds of every divine lineage, and with her breath, the laws of nature began to take shape. And yet, her story is not free of grief. It was Uranus, her first consort, who rejected many of her children, fearing their strength, burying them deep within her, his way of keeping the future stillborn. And it was Gaia who, in her anguish, crafted the sickle for Cronus, her son, and guided his hand to sever the tyrant's grip. Later, it was Cronus who repeated the cycle, swallowing his own children, and Gaia who again whispered into the world, giving rise to Zeus, the final breaker of chains, the architect of Olympus. But Gaia, though mighty, was never satisfied with war. She was not a goddess of revenge. She was a mother, and every war among her children left her wounded. Even as Zeus took power and the Olympians brought order, Gaia watched with quiet concern. The Titans, her firstborns, now lay deep in Tartarus, and even the monstrous children she bore to balance the gods, Typhon, Echidna, the giants, were cast down in thunder and blood. And Gaia, who had offered them breath, now held their remains within herself, their dreams echoing beneath mountains, their sighs in the wind. Still, she did not fade. She remained beneath the fields that fed cities, in the hills that cradled temples, in the roots of trees where prayers were buried with bones. She was worshipped not in shining halls, but under open skies and on forest floors, where her presence could be felt without translation. In the oldest rituals, she was the first to be honored. Before any god or goddess, the Greeks poured wine or scattered barley to Gaia, the ground beneath their feet. They knew without her nothing endured. No house stood, no crop grew, no story continued. She was the quiet patience of seasons, the stillness beneath footsteps, the steady turning of stars across the night, made visible only because the earth spins gently beneath them. Some say she sleeps now, listening. Others say she watches through the eyes of every owl, every deer, every storm cloud that moves over the mountaintops. Her children, gods and mortals alike, may rise and fall, but she endures, silent and alive, her heart beating once for every birth, once more for every death. In the mythic world, she is the frame, the canvas, the breath behind the words. The Greeks called her Gaia, the Romans called her Terra, and to all who have ever planted a seed or buried the dead, she has been mother. And so we close our story where it began, not in the heavens, nor the sea, nor the realm of shadow, but on the earth, firm beneath our feet, older than any myth, patient as time. The gods with all their thunder and radiance flickeringly in her presence, they are echoes. She is root, she is Gaia, and as the last light fades from the mythic sky, her lullaby continues, not in words, but in the rustle of leaves, the hush of wind, and the soft, steady rhythm of a world that never stops turning.